Chapter 1468. The awkward atmosphere gradually filled the entire coffee shop. Chi-Chi's expression at this moment was even more embarrassed. The little girl's two little hands were clasped together. She tensed up her little face nervously and embarrassedly squeezed out a little smile and said, "But I only have 33 yuan." Her friends were very happy. They didn't understand, so they didn't have to worry about not having enough money to pay the bill. The others chattered. Xian carried the packed food and smiled foolishly. He was probably thinking, "I don't have to go hungry today. Then what do we do?" The waitress spread her hands and asked, "What do we do?" Kiki scratched her head. Although she was still smiling awkwardly, her eyes began to turn red. It was as if her bright eyes were about to turn misty. Without money to pay the bill, not only was it embarrassing, but they were also trapped here. Kiki was so anxious that she was about to cry. She wanted to borrow money from the staff of the show, but of course the staff, who had already colluded with her, rejected the little girl. Just when Kiki was about to cry, the beautiful waitress gave them a solution to the problem. "Come with me." The waitress brought Kiki and a group of friends who still didn't know what was going on to the kitchen. She pointed to the big basin of cups and plates on the ground and said to Kiki, "If you help us wash the plates and make them clean, I can waive the money you owe." So that was the plan of the show. Kong finally realized the problem. He came up to Kiki and asked her what was going on. Kiki pulled brother Kong's hand and said pitifully, "We don't have enough money. Then we have to wash these plates before we can go home." "Aya, why don't you have enough money?" Dejun asked. "I don't know. Maybe we ordered too much." Kiki said, feeling wronged. It could only be said that the show was cheating the child. They said 20 yuan at the beginning, and then it became 100 yuan. Chi-Chi was still in a daze, even now. "It's okay. Let's do it." Kong didn't care. He rolled up his sleeves and got ready to work. "Kiki, brother Kong, let me help you." No, he put the things on the ground next to him, rolled up his sleeves, and squatted down. "Use this to wash the dishes first." The waitress handed over a few dishwashing foam and detergent and said, "After washing, rinse with this hot water." It wasn't very difficult. What was needed was a concerted effort. Kiki, Nua-E, and Kong washed the plates. It was inconvenient for little Chu Xian to squat down, so he and Dejun, who was a clean freak, used a hose to wash off the foam from the plates. Although the large basin of plates looked shocking, with the cooperation of the 5 children, it didn't take long to wash them. Whether or not they were clean was another matter, but none of them gave up midway. Furthermore, the 5 children were intertwined together like 5 fingers, clenching their fists. The friendship between them seemed to have been sublimated in the past few months of the journey, and each child had also grown up. They slowly became strong, sensible, and friendly, which was very rare. Taking responsibility for their mistakes, after washing the large basin of plates, they also took a photo with the 5 cute children. The waitress also waived the money they owed. The show didn't continue to make things difficult for the children. They could finally go and find their fathers. At this time, what were the fathers doing? After separating from the children, the fathers sat on the show's bus and arrived at a Western-style country villa. The villa was located in a large garden full of greenery. There were lawns, flower beds, and tall trees that provided cool shade. The house made of pure wood wasn't tall. It was only 2 stories, but it was very big. The living room was nearly 100 square meters, and with the other rooms, it was simply a mansion. "Oh my God!" Louis exclaimed as soon as he entered the room. "This is the best place our father has ever lived in." He was right. Moreover, what was even rarer was that the 5 families were all living in the same villa building. Although it was a rented place, there were friends and children. This kind of strong family vacation atmosphere was created. "The kitchen is huge," Poplar Fruit said with emotion. The kitchen was just like the kitchens of rich Westerners on television. It was very spacious and had a U-shaped layout. The cabinets, wash basin, and cooking counter were all integrated into one. Then, there were all kinds of modern kitchen utensils arranged in an orderly manner. This was simply the holy land of home cooks like Poplar Fruit. It couldn't be helped. Western countries were just big and rich. In the afternoon, the children came back with groceries. We made delicious food and then sat in a row here, Louis said with a smile in the dining room outside. The dining room was also very rich. There was a long wooden table with a simple and beautiful texture. Then, it was surrounded by long benches. At a glance, it was a place for a big family to eat. It just happened to fit the needs of Poplar Fruit and the others. It's even better to eat outside. Jun pushed open the glass door of the backyard and walked in from outside. He smiled and said, "There's the same table outside. Also, let me tell you, there's no grill here. With a grill in the yard, you can have barbecue." Indeed, eating in the yard, under the shade of a tree, looking at the green world and feeling the natural breeze, this mood was very beautiful. There were quite a few rooms. Everyone went to pick their own room and the children's room. Anyway, there was no need to pick. They were all about the same size and were all very luxurious. They just had to choose whichever room they saw. Poplar Fruit was very lucky. The first room he opened was the kind that was obviously a girl's room. The bed was a light pink flower. Although Poplar Fruit was reluctant, he felt that his daughter would definitely like this room, so he chose to stay. He could finally take off his animal skin clothes and change into his own clothes, returning to the modern world. Poplar Fruit even took a nice cold shower. Then he dragged his dirty clothes from the past 2 days to the washing machine to wash and dry. The reason why he deliberately went to wash his clothes at this time was that Poplar Fruit had no choice. The program had received advertising fees from others, so Poplar Fruit had to follow the program's instructions and appear with the advertising company's laundry detergent. When he came out, everyone was already sitting at the tables and chairs outside, chatting. Lin Yongjian also brewed green tea for everyone. He smiled and said, "Just a little more, and we can have afternoon tea. That's not a problem." Didn't Kiki, Dajuan, and Xianxian go to buy snacks? Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Zhou Shimin smiled and said, "Do you know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid that Xianxian won't be able to wait and will finish them all on the way." "Haha, but that's true. Why aren't they back yet?" Lu Yi asked with a smile. Daddy, speak of the devil." Outside the fence, the children's cries could be heard. They were back. Chapter 1469. Papa. Poplar Fruit couldn't wait. He didn't go around to the front yard. Instead, he went through the thick bushes and fences along the narrow path. As soon as he came out, he saw his daughter running over happily. "Thank you for your hard work. Let me give you a kiss." Poplar Fruit smiled, picked up his daughter, and kissed her little face. Perhaps it was because Chi-Chi's face was sweaty and dried by the wind while sitting in the convertible, but now it felt cool. Moreover, her delicate skin was very smooth and tender, making people want to take a bite out of it. The other fathers also picked up their children one after another. They smiled as brightly as Poplar Fruit. They had only been separated from their children for less than 3 hours, but they missed them so much. Back in the small yard, Poplar Fruit put down the things on the table. He asked the little fellow with a smile, "Kiki, what did you buy?" "We bought a lot." Kiki's face was full of excitement. She was so energetic that she didn't look like a little girl who had gone through a lot of trouble. "We bought candy canes, and biscuits." Papa. Kiki saw her father looking at Kong Kong and the others. She was distracted for half a second, so she anxiously took her father's hand and pulled it. When her father bent down, she simply hung her 2 long arms around his neck. "I saw that kind of candy today. Sister said it was called flying saucers." Poplar Fruit picked up his daughter, looked at her big eyes, and said with a smile, "You mean the kind of cotton candy with crispy skin that we used to eat at Uncle Alan's house? It looks like a UFO." "Papa, you remember?" The little girl's surprised look was also very beautiful, because Kiki loved to smile so much. Even when she was surprised, she was full of smiles. Girls who liked to smile were not ugly, let alone beautiful girls who liked to smile. Of course, Poplar Fruit laughed. "You liked it very much at that time." Of course, that was not the reason. Poplar Fruit's brain was like a computer, and he remembered everything. Based on his daughter's description, he searched his mind and found this memory. Kiki pouted and twisted her body coquettishly, asking, Then why didn't you ask Uncle Aaron to buy it for me?" There were no flying underscore sellers in the candies he sent over. Haha, it's fine. Before we go back, we'll go to that shop again and buy you a lot of candies. You can eat as much as you want. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Okay, okay. The little girl giggled and nodded in satisfaction. She jumped down from her father's arms. Kiki no longer liked others holding on to her and refusing to let go. Now that she could walk on her own, Kiki liked to walk on her own. On the other side, Zhou Shimin also opened the paper bag that Xian was holding and asked in surprise, "Wow, why did you buy so many hamburgers and fries?" Kiki heard and ran over to help Xian explain. "It's like this, Papa Xian, we all went to a shop to eat, and then they gave us a lot of fries and hamburgers. We couldn't finish them. Then you packed them up and brought them back, right? You didn't waste food. Give me a thumbs up," Zhou Shimin said with a smile, and gave a thumbs up. Hu Jun also came over, took a look, and said with a smile, "It just so happened that we were short of staple food." Kiki still wanted to continue, and said, "Yes, but we didn't have enough money, so we had to pay the bill." "Then what happened?" Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "Did you borrow money from Uncle and Auntie, or did you tell others that you came back to ask Papa for money?" Kiki shook her little head, and her soft long hair brushed her father's hand. She said, "Neither. We didn't have money to pay the bill, so my sister asked us to wash the dishes. After we finished washing the dishes, she didn't need the rest of the money we gave her." "You also washed the dishes?" Lu Yi asked in surprise before Poplar Fruit said anything. "Yes, we all washed the dishes," Kong Kong said on the side. When he said that, the little boy straightened his chest and was very proud. "That's right. You all have to remember in the future how much money you have by things that cost as much as you want. If you don't have money to pay, you will be punished," Hu Jun said. Worried that Hu Jun's words were too serious, Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "I think you are very good. It's great to be able to wash the dishes and pay for it through your own labor, instead of asking for help from others." Poplar Fruit took the little fellow to his room. When the little girl saw the luxurious big room, she immediately jumped up. He took out the clothes that he had prepared and said with a smile, "Go, take a bath and wash your hair first." When changing the animal skin clothes for the little fellow, Kiki giggled and shared with her father her shopping experience in the town. "Papa, do you know, we wear these clothes on the road. Do others think that you are very strange?" Poplar Fruit said with a smile. No, they all thought that we were wearing real clothes." Kiki spread out her hands and smiled happily. "They even asked me if it was Halloween in advance." "That's right, Halloween is at the end of this month." After giving his daughter a bath, Poplar Fruit brought Kiki, who had changed into modern clothes, downstairs. The little girl, who was originally a little wildcat, was now wearing a light pink dress, pantyhose, and a light red jacket. She looked fresh and cute. The other little friends were even faster. After all, it was easier for boys to take a bath and change clothes than girls. Zhou Shimin and Lin Yongjian were tidying up the snacks and table, while Hu Jun and Lu Yi transformed into chefs and went into the kitchen. Poplar Fruit also went into the kitchen and asked with a smile, "What am I in charge of?" "I've already prepared it for you." Hu Jun was wearing an apron and holding a spatula. He turned his head and smiled. "You are in charge of roasting the chicken wings." Lu Yi was washing the vegetables. He also had vegetables that he wanted to cook. He smiled and said, "Poplar Fruit, they keep saying that they want to eat the barbecue made by Uncle Poplar Fruit. That's because barbecue may seem simple, but it was very difficult to make it taste good. Some people might even be undercooked or burnt, not to mention the taste. However, where was the grill here?" Poplar Fruit waved his hand and smiled. "There is no grill. Looks like we can only use an oven." Using an oven, there was no way to control the temperature and time. After all, the time of the oven was set from the beginning. Poplar Fruit could not adjust it during the barbecue process. Poplar Fruit could only cut the chicken wings at the beginning, mix the best sauce, soak them for half an hour, and then send them into the oven. Although it's not the best, it shouldn't be bad either. Poplar Fruit took off his gloves as he smiled at the group of children who were waiting by the side, drooling. "Let's go. Let's not stay here. Don't worry, there will definitely be good food for all of you." At noon, they sat around the table and happily ate a not-so-sumptuous lunch. In the afternoon, they would begin a new mission. Chapter 1470. Poplar Fruit originally thought that Fong Bei and the rest of the group of mothers would appear today and join them in the game, but they did not. In the afternoon, on the bus to the farm, Poplar Fruit still did not see them. The main reason was that after taking an afternoon nap, Kiki, who had calmed down a little from her excitement, missed Fong Bei a little. Taking advantage of the fact that they were not in the state of recording, Poplar Fruit ran to the front to ask the choreographer who was riding with them. The choreographer smiled and said, "They won't be coming today. They will only be recording tomorrow. Don't worry, they will give you phones to contact your families tonight." It seemed that Poplar Fruit had misunderstood. This time, the group of mothers did not directly participate in the recording of the second and third day like the previous time. However, this program was originally about where do you go. If the mothers were too important, it would go against the original purpose of the program. When Poplar Fruit returned, he passed the news to Kiki. The little girl was still a little disappointed. However, this disappointment was diluted by surprise a few minutes later. The farm that they had arrived at was too beautiful. It was either a small forest in picturesque disorder or a neat and beautiful meadow. There were even people riding horses in the meadow, herding round woolly sheep. "Kangaroos, kangaroos!" Kiki shouted happily. The sharp-eyed little girl could see from afar that there were kangaroos that were encircled in a large meadow. If it were not for Poplar Fruit holding her hand, Kiki probably could not wait to run over. Everyone gathered in front of the village chief and listened to the village chief's usual welcome speech. The village chief was really interesting. Every time he went to a place, he would act like the owner. But that was also true. Otherwise, why would he be called the village chief? "Babies, the village chief has a question to ask you." The village chief smiled and said, "If you were to choose a pet, what animal would you prefer?" The village chief had already predicted what the children's answer would be. It would definitely be a cat, a dog, or a more special one, a parrot, etc. However, just as he finished speaking, the children in front of him shouted one after another, "Village chief! Village chief!" Only Kiki was more honest. She raised her arms and said with a smile, "Panda, I like pandas." However, the limelight was stolen by Kong Kong and the other naughty boys. First, it was Noah-E who unknowingly started the conversation. He didn't even know that he had made a mistake. Then, Kong Kong laughed until he was convulsing with laughter as he recited the village chief's name. After that, Jun followed suit. Even the confused Xian followed suit and said the village chief's name. The village chief was amused by this group of little guys. All right, let's put this topic aside for now. Next, the village chief invited the farm owner, Mr. Steve, and his 3 daughters. They would be assisting the production team in the recording of the farm sports meet. Before the next segment began, the dads had to introduce themselves to the farm owner in English. This small test was mainly to test the English level of the fathers. Of course, it was obviously not that good. However, if they didn't say it well, it would be funny. It was like the popular saying, "We are tired of logging." Therefore, Poplar Fruit, whose English was comparable to the locals, was skipped by the production team. Instead, Zhou Shimin's non-standard pronunciation, Lu Ye's funny performance, and Lin Yongjian's confusing grammar were favored. I underscore, 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 Yong underscore, and my underscore, English underscore, and underscore, is underscore, underscore, Yong underscore, in. Teacher Lin's Chinese name and English name were actually reversed. Today we underscore together underscore here very underscore happy. Lin Yongjian knew that he didn't say it well, so he simply let it go. He smiled gracefully and said, "We are very grateful to you. Please welcome us here." Needless to say, Lin Yongjian's messy self-introduction without any grammar was very interesting. Everyone was convulsing with laughter. The audience also felt that Teacher Lin, who could speak with a smile despite his elementary school English, was very funny. What's more, he even revealed 2 adorable teeth. Fortunately, although other than Poplar Fruit, the other dads with average English were still able to understand the messy English they spoke. After all, the American culture was too strong. Everyone had hummed a few sentences from American movies and TV series. Therefore, even if it was a little messy, the basic words were still relatively clear. The village chief stood up. Next, the farm owner, Mr. Steve, introduced the rules of the game. The other party also understood that the English level of the Chinese people in front of him was uneven, so the words he used were relatively simple. Every child, take this food with you and go look for your favorite animals. Mr. Steve patted the few plastic buckets in front of him and said, choose one, bring it back, and participate in the competition together. Kiki understood, and so did Kong Kong. However, Xian and Dejun were confused, so Kong Kong and Kiki explained it to their friends. Okay, kids go. Okay, children, let's move. Steve laughed. The little ones who had been fascinated by the farm animals for a long time left their dads behind. Each of them carried a small bucket and started running. I like small animals. Kiki giggled and ran the fastest with Kong Kong and Nui. Xian's short legs also hurriedly ran in small steps and shouted in a silly voice, wait for me, wait for me. Dejun, on the other hand, was calmer. He carried the bucket and walked slowly. When the assistant beside him asked him, Dejun said calmly, Aya, what's the rush? They're all locked in cages. They won't run away. What he said was true. The assistant could not find a reason to refute him. Kiki, who ran the fastest, was immediately welcomed by the army of animals. Woof woof. Two chow chows, one big and one small, with black and white fur, ran over. Wah dogs. Kong Kong, who was behind, shouted happily, but her pace slowed down. These two chow chows, the big one was definitely heavier than her and looked a little scary. Although Kong Kong liked dogs, who knew if this big dog would bite people? Only Kiki did not slow down and ran forward to welcome them. Miraculously, the two chow chows that ran over were not hostile towards Kiki. Instead, they intimately surrounded Kiki and sniffed Kiki's scent. Kiki, I like dogs too. The little girl excitedly stretched out her hand to pet the chow chows. Not only did the chow chows not hide, it stopped its bouncing body and quietly lay there, letting Kiki pet its head. It even squinted its eyes in enjoyment. The other chow chows saw this and ran in front of Kiki. It flipped its body for feet in the air and exposed its soft belly. Chapter 1471. Visiting the farm had nothing to do with the dads. Some of the dads were worried and wanted to sneak over to take a look, but they were stopped by the village chief. The village chief smiled and said, don't worry, there's Mr. Steve and a lot of people from the farm. There won't be any danger. It was mainly to test the children's performance in front of all kinds of animals when their fathers were not around. If their fathers were around to protect them, they would not be able to see the scenes they wanted to take. In the farm, Kong Kong and Nui saw the two cute chow lying in front of Kiki's feet and went over to play with them. However, the chow chow was not familiar with Kong Kong and Nui, so was not interested in them. When it saw them reaching out their hands, it immediately jumped up from the ground. It did not bare its teeth to scare the two boys, but it still circled around Kiki's heels to avoid them. Normally, it would be humans walking the dogs. But now, because Kong Kong and Nui were too excited, it had become the dogs walking the humans. Of course, there were also some who were afraid. Even though the dogs looked silly, Xian still walked far away from them. He trotted 2 steps and leaned against the adults next to him. He even said weakly, I'm afraid. If it wasn't for Kong Kong and Nui coming over and chasing the two chow everywhere, Kiki would probably be able to play with them for an entire afternoon. However, there were still many small animals waving at Kiki. Chi-Chi had a chance to take a look and was immediately attracted. She happily carried the small plastic bucket and ran forward. This is Piggy. This is a lamb. Ah, I see an ostrich. Kiki couldn't help muttering to herself as she watched. The little girl was delighted to see the ostrich and quickly ran over. Bye-bye. As soon as Kiki's figure appeared, the 5 or 6 ostriches in the cage eagerly surrounded her and looked at Kiki. Hello. The little girl was a little shy at first when she was surrounded. She waved her hand as a greeting and then slowly approached. Because the weather was still a little cold, Kiki didn't look very thin with the jacket on. However, from the side view, the little girl's slender and long legs were a little distressing. While the audience liked it, they couldn't help but express some dissatisfaction with poplar fruit. What kind of father are you? Our daughter is so skinny. Why don't you let her eat more meat? This was an injustice. In that case, only those viewers who knew about poplar fruit through the show and not poplar fruit's true fans. This was because the latter knew that even if poplar fruit went hungry, he would not let his daughter go hungry. In fact, Kiki ate a lot of food. She ate almost as much as a 12 or 13-year-old child. However, it seems that all the nutrients absorbed by the little girl were used to grow taller. In the past, Kiki had grown by nearly 15 centimeters. For a 4-year-old, my daughter, this was very impressive. Of course, although Kiki was a little thin, it didn't mean that her body was unhealthy. Kiki was thin, but she wasn't light at all. Her fat content was relatively low, and she was all small muscles. This was a little similar to poplar fruit. Moreover, looking at her lively and energetic appearance, one could tell that Kiki was definitely a healthy and sunny baby. Have you guys had lunch? Kiki gradually walked closer. Although it was the first time she saw ostriches, looking at the furry little heads poking out of the net, Kiki was also touched by their cuteness. Oink! Oink! The ostriches' cries came one after another, as if they were calling for Kiki. I know you guys are hungry, so I brought you delicious food, Kiki said sympathetically. She tentatively touched the head of the ostrich closest to her. The ostrich was very obedient. She reached out to take a carrot from the small plastic bucket and handed it to the ostrich. However, it seemed that the ostrich was more interested in the other feed in her bucket. Looking at the ostrich's eyes, Kiki suddenly understood. She put the carrot back and took out a handful of feed. As soon as she sent it over, an ostrich couldn't wait to eat it. Kiki suddenly giggled. She didn't move her body, only shrinking her neck. Then she turned to the cameraman and said, it feels itchy. Hee. The net fence was just big enough for the ostriches to stick their mouths out, but not their heads, so at most 2 ostriches could reach it. The ostriches crowded around each other to stick their heads out, almost squashing the innermost one. You guys can't bully your friends. The feed in Kiki's hands was quickly finished. The little girl pouted unhappily and reached out to pat the ostrich that was squeezing the most fiercely. She said, "You guys have to line up. You can't cut the queue. Also, you've already eaten. You have to go to the back." Listening to the little girl's nagging, the ostriches blinked their big eyes in confusion and turned their heads to look at her, as if they were curious about what Kiki was saying. However, soon, a miracle appeared. The ostriches were in a mess and began to move their positions. The ostriches that had already eaten the feed in Kiki's hands earlier gave up their positions. Of course, no one thought that it was Kiki's credit, because there were so many ostriches in a mess that it was impossible to tell which one was which. Moreover, their necks were very long. As long as they shrank back and mixed together, they looked no different from before. That's good. The 4-year-old girl nodded her head in satisfaction. She bent down and scooped out a handful of feed from the plastic bucket. She handed it to them as she muttered, "Ostrich babies, you have to eat until you're full. You can only grow up when you're full. Then you can go find your papa and mama." The audience might have some doubts. Kiki, how can you tell that they're ostrich babies? In fact, it was true. The ostriches on the farm are basically all artificially bred, and the batch in front of Kiki were little ostriches that had yet to reach adulthood, so they didn't look very tall and were a little uneven. If there was an attentive audience, they could actually see a small sign on the television screen earlier, which clearly said that these ostriches were chicks. Of course, it was also in English. There was no need to care too much about these details. Kiki finished feeding these ostriches, but there was still a lot of food in her plastic bucket that the ostriches couldn't eat, so she decided to leave to find the next animal. However, it seemed that both parties were a little reluctant to part. The ostriches were all squeaking, and one of them even used its beak to hold Kiki's clothes. "I'll go feed the others first and leave for a while. Okay? I'll come back to play with you later." Kiki patted the naughty little ostrich lovingly, and they finally let go. However, They all moved their bodies and followed Kiki's footsteps, reluctantly watching Kiki skipping away. Chapter 1472. I actually like baby ostriches very much. Kiki walked forward. When she heard the cameraman's question, she turned her head and smiled. But I have to take care of the other small animals first. They haven't eaten yet. As soon as she finished speaking, the little girl exclaimed, carried the plastic bucket, and ran happily again. She was really energetic. The cameraman just shook his head and strode after her with the camera in his arms. In front of them, Dejun was taking care of Short Pony. Although it was small, its mane was draped over it, and it looked very furry and cute. In addition, it ate and slept well, and its belly was round. It had simply abandoned the nature of a horse to run and turned into a cute pony. Is this a horse? It's so cute. Kiki went up to it enviously and asked Dejun, "Can I touch it?" "Okay, but you can only touch it." Dejun looked at Kiki and said, "Don't scare it." "I won't scare it. It will definitely like me," Kiki said as she gently touched the pony's big face. The little girl's action was quite unexpected. Others, like Dejun, tentatively touched the pony's back at the beginning, but Kiki directly touched the pony's face. Of course, the reason why she was not on guard was because Dejun had already given her a good start. With Dejun standing beside the pony and feeding it, Kiki felt that the pony had a gentle personality and would not hurt people. That was the truth. When Kiki began to tidy up the pony's soft and long mane, the pony ate the food in Dejun's hand, turned its head, lowered its head, and began to rub against Kiki's arms. "Aya, Hee, you're too naughty." Kiki's laughter was like the crisp sound of the wind chimes in the wooden house in the forest dancing in the wind, making people feel intoxicated. However, Dejun was very jealous. He frowned and said, "Aya, Kiki, this pony is mine." In order to protect his toy, Dejun was a little angry. Chi-Chi was not a child who liked to compete with others. When she saw that her little friend was going to monopolize the pony, she knew that there should be a first-come, first-served basis for everything. She spread out her hands and said, "All right, then I'll go find something else." Walking back, Kong Kong, who had just tricked Xian, saw Kiki. His eyes lit up, and he quickly ran over and said, Kiki, I know what animal you should choose." "What animal should I choose?" Chi-Chi blinked her big eyes curiously at Big Brother Kong Kong. "Sheep. Kiki, you should choose a sheep." Kong Kong laughed. Kiki responded Kong Kong's success. Kong Kong gave her a thumbs up and said, "Yes, because you're Yang Loachi, you should choose a sheep." Earlier, Kong Kong had used a similar excuse to recommend a pig to Xian as his friend. Although Xian didn't choose the pig because it was too stubborn, Kong Kong felt that this warm-hearted pig was quite fun. "I'll take you there. I know where the sheep is," Kong Kong said enthusiastically. When they arrived at the sheep pen, Kiki was a little confused because the sheep in front of her was beyond her knowledge. It was tall, strong, and not as fluffy as other sheep. Its hair was very short, and it was black all over, probably because it often rolled in the mud. "Brother Kong Kong, is this a cow?" Kiki looked at the two small horns and asked in confusion. "This is a sheep." Kong Kong had already confirmed before, so he said solemnly, "It's a cow." Kiki said disapprovingly. She said, "Brother Kong Kong, have you forgotten the sheep we saw in Shishan? They all have long beards, and they bleat." Perhaps it was due to Chi-Chi's voice, but the moment the little girl's voice fell, the bull-like goat opened its mouth and bleated twice. It was as if the atmosphere had turned awkward all of a sudden. Chi-Chi looked at it in confusion for a moment before admitting helplessly, "All right, it's a sheep." After feeding the cow sheep, Kiki did not follow Brother Kong Kong's suggestion to choose it as her friend for the competition. Instead, she continued to walk forward. There were too many animals here, and there were even a few sheep pens. Kiki saw Anua competing with a few lambs that really looked like sheep. There was also the little rabbit. Although Chi-Chi liked it very much, she continued to walk forward after taking a look. As she walked, she explained to the cameraman, Xian is inside. I don't want to go over." "Why?" "Because if Xian chooses the small rabbit, I can't choose it," Kiki said. and Xian is so afraid of big animals, so I'll leave the obedient rabbit to him. What a kind-hearted little girl. However, the girl started running again. She saw the kangaroo she had been looking for. Kangaroo. The girl ran so fast that Steve, who was worried that the kangaroo would punch her, quickly ran over and accidentally entered the camera. Be_careful. However, fortunately, the kangaroo did not have any hostility towards the girl who suddenly appeared. In this farm, where people came and went, they were used to the existence of humans. What's more, Chi-Chi was born with a kind of magical animal affinity. Soon, Kiki was surrounded by a group of kangaroos. Even Steve, who was standing beside Kiki to protect her, was squeezed by the kangaroos' butts. They're so cute. Kiki looked at the kangaroos' small heads that did not match their bodies. They were indeed cute now, but Steve was very nervous because the kangaroos' temperament was not like their simple and honest appearance. They were violent maniacs who loved boxing. Don't provoke a kangaroo. A kangaroo would not reason with you, and with its short hands and powerful legs, no one could withstand its punches and kicks. Haven't you seen many online videos where a kangaroo KO'd a boxer in a few moves? The ignorant were fearless. Kiki picked up her plastic bucket and began to distribute food to the kangaroos. Are you hungry too? It had to be said that the kangaroos looked very cute when they ate. Kiki chuckled as she fed them. Oh, look, they can eat with their hands. They took the food with their mouths, then held it with their two short hands and slowly gnawed on it. At this point, kangaroos were quite similar to humans. After feeding the kangaroos, Kiki's plastic bucket was empty. She did not care, but put it on the ground and moved closer to the kangaroos. Can I see your pockets? The reason why kangaroos were called kangaroos was because they had pouches in their bellies, which could allow premature baby kangaroos to live in. Kiki was full of curiosity about this. Kiki said this in Mandarin, so when Steve saw Kiki's actions and wanted to stop her, it was too late. Chapter 1473. Don't. Steve's reminder was still a step too late. Kiki had already bent down and reached into the pocket of the big kangaroo in front of her. Miraculously, Chi-Chi did not encounter any violent reactions from the kangaroos. On the contrary, the scene miraculously did not have any ripples. The kangaroos were still eating what they were supposed to eat. Even Steve's exclamation did not affect the mood of the kangaroos. In fact, even if Kiki did not have any problems, the video would have been cut out by the program team and would not have eventually appeared on television. After all, it was too dangerous. If the audience saw that the program team had allowed Kiki to be so close to a potentially dangerous animal, they would definitely have scolded the program team for their incompetence and stupidity. To put it nicely, the program team did not plan well. To put it bluntly, the program team was taking the lives of the children as a joke. Was this really Where's Dad Going or Bear Grylls Survival in the Wild? Even if nothing really happened, under such controversy, who would be willing to bring their children to the show in the future? Who would still watch the show? Old Master Steve broke out in a cold sweat, but he saw that the kangaroos were very calm and let Kiki touch their pouches. The kangaroo that was touched even opened its mouth slightly and smiled as if it was enjoying it. What was going on? Old Master Steve saw that Kiki was about to throw herself into the arms of the kangaroo, and then reached into the kangaroo's pouch, but the kangaroo was indifferent. Its two forelimbs were slightly closed, as if it wanted to hug Kiki. Well, Old Master Steve felt that his common sense had been challenged. Although these kangaroos were domesticated, after all, they were not cats and dogs. They should not be so docile, right? The mother kangaroo was so happy to let others touch her pouch. It was no less than a tiger with its back to a human, and then said flatteringly, come on, spank me. It's so comfortable." Kiki finally stepped back. She giggled and gave the big kangaroo a thumbs up. As if it felt that it was being praised, the big kangaroo propped its tail on the ground, then leaned back, squinted its eyes, and looked up to the sky with a silly smile. This brave and fearless big sister kangaroo. Have you lost your moral integrity? Kiki had a lot of fun playing with the kangaroos. She even imitated them by jumping and running for a while. She even wanted to bring them back to participate in the competition as her little friends. Unfortunately, old Master Steve did not allow it, because these guys were really not something that children could control. Even with him by his side, Steve could not guarantee his own safety. In fact, Steve had made the right choice. The kangaroo was very friendly to Kiki, but that did not mean that it would open its arms to other children. Kiki felt a little regretful, but she did not insist on it with the adults. She pacified the kangaroos, who had become a little restless because of her departure. Kiki walked back. Chi-Chi hadn't forgotten that she had left a promise at the very beginning of this place. The little girl carried the small plastic bucket and ran like a gust of wind to the first fence she saw after entering the farm. Inside the fence, the ostriches had already lined up neatly in a row, like an ostrich army, waiting for Kiki's inspection. Of course, the height was uneven, and it was obvious that they were not well trained. "Haven't you eaten enough?" Kiki asked puzzledly as she held the barbed wire of the fence with one hand and gently touched the head of the nearest ostrich with the other hand. "Oof! Oof!" The ostriches cried out at the same time. Listening to the noise, it was as noisy as pigs being slaughtered. Okay, I understand." Kiki giggled. "You're not hungry, but you want to go out with me to play, right?" The ostriches paused when Kiki spoke and looked at Kiki. Then, not long after, they began to cry out again. "You all want to go out, but I can only take one with me," the little girl said worriedly. The audience's feelings were still separated by a screen, so it was far less intuitive than the cameraman's. He stared dumbfoundedly at Chi-Chi, who was talking to herself like she was sleep-talking, but the ostriches in front of him seemed to really be responding to Chi-Chi. "Oof, oof, oof." Suddenly, the ostriches in the fence were in a commotion, and there was a tendency for them to huddle together at the door. "Don't quarrel, don't fight." The little girl anxiously waved her hand and said, "My papa said that we should respect the old and love the young, so I have decided I want to choose the youngest among you, Didi." Looking in the direction of Kiki's finger, the ostriches turned their heads and looked at the little ostrich in the middle. It was not too small, about the same height as an adult, but it was still short compared to the big ostriches, which could grow up to 3 meters tall. Among the group of baby ostriches, it was also the smallest one. When the other ostriches lowered their heads dejectedly, it raised its head high and cried out excitedly. "Don't be sad." With the help of the farm workers, Chi-Chi put a leash on the little ostrich while comforting the other ostriches who were reluctant to part with the ostrich. "I'll tell Mr. Steve to bring you out to play more often." She didn't know whether the ostriches understood or not, but they were still in low spirits. They sadly watched Kiki leave with the little ostrich. At the gate of the farm, the children who had found their friends gathered together. At this time, everyone saw that each child had chosen a different animal companion. Kong Kong chose for a long time and chose the Chow Chow that had welcomed them at the gate at the beginning. Nuo, he chose one of the 2 lambs that he had been struggling with for a long time. And Xian chose the rabbit that Kiki had last seen him squatting in the circle of rabbits. What surprised the audience the most was Dejun. In everyone's impression, Dejun was the most timid boy, but he had quietly led a pony over. Although it was a pony, the pony was still a head taller than Dejun. It was also so burly, like a short mountain of meat. Of course, the pony's temperament was quite gentle. Wherever Dejun led it, it would follow. The children were having so much fun. Some were sharing their experiences with their good friends, while others were busy improving their relationships with their new friends. Anyway, their mouths were chattering nonstop. Finally, the farm owner's huge tractor trailer arrived. The children led their animal companions up the steps to get on the trailer. The trailer was so big that it was spacious enough even for more than 10 adults, let alone the children. However, Dejun's pony couldn't get on the trailer. It was tied to the back of the trailer and followed the slow trailer. It couldn't be mistreatment. The pony liked the feeling of running. Chapter 1474. Poplar Fruit and the other fathers were led to the new location by the village chief. It was an open lawn, and there was also a fenced area that was made into 5 long and narrow tracks. On the other side, there were all kinds of props. Of course, the fathers had no time to talk about this. They were looking forward to the arrival of the children. As a result, the children gave them a solid surprise. When the children got out of the car one after another, Kiki led an ostrich with graceful steps, and the pony tied to the back of the car was also led by Dajuan. The fathers' thoughts began to become chaotic. Kiki actually brought an ostrich. Zhou Shimin saw that Xian was only leading a well-behaved rabbit, and he was relieved. Instead, he patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder and laughed. Poplar Fruit was really a little scared by Kiki's audacity. Of course, it cannot be said that he was scared. Kiki actually brought an ostrich back, which was both unexpected and reasonable. It was unexpected because at first he thought that Kiki would at most bring some cats, dogs, ducks, or rabbits. Poplar Fruit never thought that such a big ostrich, which was even taller than Dajuan's pony, would bring an ostrich. But he knew his daughter's interests and hobbies. This little girl was full of strong interest in all kinds of animals since she was young. In the past, when they went to the zoo to play, Kiki was excited from the beginning until the last second when she left the zoo. If there was a tiger on the farm, and it was merciful and did not eat the little girl, maybe Kiki would bring it over. "Papa, I chose this." Kiki led the ostrich over and said happily. As for the long-necked, small-headed creature, it looked at Yonghua with its big eyes. Suddenly, it made two woo-woo sounds. Yonghua didn't know if it was a greeting or something else, but she had done her part. After that, she no longer paid any attention to Yonghua and leisurely moved her two bamboo-like legs, gracefully pacing around Chi-Chi. That's what an ostrich is. Even if he obeyed Kiki, the arrogance and vigilance in his bones would not be erased. The arrival of the children and their animal companions made the atmosphere in the field much more lively. However, soon, the limelight was stolen by the alpaca led by the village chief. Alpaca, alpaca! The legendary grass mud horse had actually appeared in front of everyone. "Village chief, can I exchange with you?" Kong Kong shouted as she raised the leash holding the chow chow in her hands. "Sorry, I can't." The village head chuckled. He could see that the little ones were very interested in the alpaca beside him. Just as he was smiling proudly, suddenly, the alpaca gave the village chief a strange look, as if it was not interested in the man beside it. Pooh! This was not the laughter that everyone could not help but laugh. Almost no one was mentally prepared and could only watch as the village chief was sprayed with saliva by the alpaca. Ha ha! Seeing the village chief being unlucky, the father and children laughed heartlessly. On the other side, Lu Yi even started singing, "A mythical beast is not something you can hold as you wish." It attracted another round of laughter. No one deliberately mocked him, nor did anyone become angry out of embarrassment. It was just a mutual teasing between friends. Unknowingly, whether it was the adults or the children, their relationship with the village chief had become so close that they could joke around without caring. However, after this episode, it might be difficult for them to see each other again. They really hoped that their friendship could last forever in each other's hearts. With no other choice, after a pause, the village chief got someone to lead the mythical beast away. Then, he took a towel and wiped his face, wiping off the mythical beast's saliva before he could speak again. However, the Two-Face program team did not let go of the scene of the village chief making a fool of himself. The viewers in front of the television were lucky to see the entire scene of the village chief being sprayed. Naturally, seeing the village chief in trouble, the children also understood. They shrunk their heads, especially Kong Kong. They no longer dared to make any requests to exchange with the village chief. The village chief even chuckled and pointed at Kong Kong. "Look, Kong Kong doesn't dare to speak anymore." The laughter stopped, and the village chief returned to the main topic. He let each child introduce their little friend. "Mine is called Guai Guy." Kiki was the first to speak. The little girl's face was full of smiles. She said enthusiastically, as if she was presenting a treasure, because it sounds like Guai Guy, and it's also very obedient. Hearing everyone's kind laughter, Kiki stuck out her tongue in embarrassment. However, Kiki's explanation was not very accurate. Would an ostrich sound like Guai Guai? Even if it was Gua Gua, it was still the sound of a duck. Kiki's Guai Guai seemed to know how to cooperate with her. Everyone knew that it was a kind of Gua Gua sound. It sounded a little like a voiceless consonant. It was pronounced through the throat, and there was no explosive sound. However, everyone saw that the little girl was holding on to Guai Guai and looked a little shy and cute, so they did not criticize her. Anyway, it's your little friend. You can say whatever you want. The female assistant had already instructed them on how to come up with names when they were in the trailer. Therefore, every child gave their little friends a nice name. Furthermore, there were many foreign names. For example, Xian Xian named his little rabbit Kevin. Kong Kong named her Chow Chow Chow. However, there were also strange names. In comparison, Kiki named her little ostrich Guai Guai. Chapter 1475. Soon, it was time for the children's first race of the day. Of course, it was also a race related to the animal companions that the children had chosen. Next, babies, you will start from the starting point. You will lead your new friends and run a race together. The purpose of this race is to test the degree of tacit understanding between the babies and your new friends. The village chief said with a smile. This was pure nonsense. The children had not spent more than half an hour with the animals they had chosen. How could they have a tacit understanding? Of course, Kiki and Sweetheart were an exception. Although it was nonsense, the race still had to start. Having played the game so many times, the children were very familiar with the process of the program. They did not procrastinate, and soon, they formed a row at the starting point. The fathers stood at the finish line, smiling and applauding for their children. Sweetheart, you have to do your best later. The little girl turned around and gently hugged the little ostrich's neck. She even rubbed her little face against it. The cameraman and the fathers were sweating profusely. Fortunately, the little ostrich was very obedient. Just like the name that Kiki had given it, it did not angrily peck Kiki's delicate face. Hey, hey! The little ostrich finally responded to Kiki's expectations. Its eyes were sparkling, and there was a feeling of soaring, fighting spirit. Don't forget, ostriches were the fastest birds in the world. They could not fly, but they were super good at running. Their usual speed was 80 kilometers per hour, and when they sprinted, they could reach 90 kilometers per hour. Even if the ostrich that Kiki had chosen was far from being an adult, its natural love for running was imprinted in its bones, making it have a kind of explosive passion for racing. It was more than just awesome. It was showing that it was going to do its best. Everyone, get into position. The village chief pretended to shout at the starting point. Get ready, run. As soon as he finished speaking, Kiki moved her two slender legs under her short gauze skirt and ran out like an arrow, leaving the bow. Come on, come on. At the beginning, the fathers at the finish line were shouting. Their voices were very loud, but it was unknown who they supported. On the other hand, the children were focused on their race. On the track, there were many situations. Kong Kong was fine. He ran for a while and used a rope to restrain the Chow Chow. The Chow Chow obediently followed him. Moreover, the dog's movements were very rhythmic. It looked very agile and beautiful. Xian Xian rushed out excitedly, but after only 2 steps, he looked back and saw that his little rabbit was still eating grass, as if it was still in its own world. Dejun also rushed out, but his Tyrannosaurus Rex was still in place. The pony was much heavier than Dejun, so when Dejun ran out, he was pulled back by the rope and fell to the ground. The pony was still leisurely swinging its ponytail and standing in place. He had an expression that said, "You guys can play by yourselves and let me quietly be a handsome man." Newell, he was a little slower. He ran 2 steps and was pulled back by his little lamb. However, he pulled hard, and the little lamb understood and followed. It ran with small steps and didn't run very fast, but at least Wong Wong worked hard. The fastest runner was not Kong Kong and his Chow Chow Chow, but Kiki and Guai Guai. After the village chief gave the order, the little girl ran out. Almost at the same time, as if they had telepathy, the little ostrich also cried out Guai Guai, and strode forward with its two strong legs. Elegantly, and without losing speed, it started to run. Before it ran half the distance, the little ostrich that was running excitedly started to become dissatisfied with its slow speed. "Why?" The little ostrich cried out excitedly, and actually squeezed forward, pushing Chi-Chi aside and coming to the front. "Why? Why?" The little ostrich looked back at Kiki as if to say, "Hurry up, hurry up." Chi-Chi also let out a happy cry and sped up to charge forward. The situation had changed, and it became the little ostrich leading the race. The dads and foreigners who were watching felt a little embarrassed. However, it was a pity that the track was less than 50 meters long, and they reached the end very quickly. After the little ostrich and Kiki collided with the line, they were blocked by the closed fence in front of them and could only stop resentfully. "Why? Why?" The little ostrich called out twice, as if it was not satisfied yet. Kiki was first, Kong Kong was a little slower and was second, then Nua-E, who was even slower, took third. At the back, Xian was coaxing the little rabbit, but the little rabbit ignored him. Little fatty Xian became anxious and pulled the rope, dragging the little rabbit towards the finish line. Xian dragged it over the finish line as if he was dragging a box. The pitiful little rabbit was dragged upside down without any resistance. Luckily, the rope was connected to a noose that looked like a small vest and didn't strangle the little rabbit. The little rabbit was still very calm. After it stopped, it continued to nibble on its grass. Xian was fourth. Dejun was more troublesome. He couldn't compete with the T-Rex like Xian because they weren't even on the same level. He couldn't even pull it. Why was this little pony so stubborn now? Wasn't it quite obedient before? Everyone was a little anxious for Dejun. Luckily, the staff at the side were already prepared. The village chief took a bundle of grass and handed it to Dejun. "Yes, use grass. Slowly lead it over." Although Lin Yongjian was watching from the side, he still acted as if he was participating in the race and couldn't help but give advice to his son. Although the outcome was already decided, Dejun still patiently used the grass to lead the T-Rex slowly to the finish line. The ranking of the race wasn't important. The process was what was important. At the finish line, a small incident happened to the children who had already arrived. Nua-E was pestering his father, as if he wanted to bring his little lamb called Wong Wong home. When Kiki heard this, her eyes lit up as she looked at her father. Poplar Fruit's forehead was sweating as he quickly turned his head to look left and right, pretending not to have noticed. Just before Kiki could speak, Lu Yi set an example and said, "All right, but you have to ask for its mother's permission." "All right then, let's go find Wong Wong's mother." Nua-E had a persevering spirit, as he innocently said. Lu Yi was sweating profusely as he quickly added, "And its father, its grandparents, its first uncle and second uncle." As expected of someone who studied acting, his eloquence was as good as a rhyme. Nua-E felt that a large group of the lamb's relatives were rushing towards him and immediately felt the pressure. He didn't persist and sighed dejectedly. "AI, forget it then." Kiki saw that her little friend had given up and hesitated for a while. She also didn't mention the idea of bringing obedient home to her father. Luckily, Chapter 1476. The competition between the children and their animal companions came to an end. Although they were reluctant to leave, the farm owner, Mr. Steve, took the lead to bring the animals back. This took up another Xiao Duan's time, but it didn't matter. The audience could still see the next round of competition as usual. Before that, the village chief had a question for everyone. In all the episodes of Where is Daddy? Which game did you like the most? Which game did you like the most? Chi-Chi jumped and shouted without hesitation, "Race, race." For a long time, she was unable to extricate herself from the mood of playing happily with the little ostrich just now. However, many precious memories floated through Poplar Fruit's mind. For example, back in the Flaming Mountains, he and the little girl played the game of throwing grapes into their fathers' mouths. There was also the game of Zaidanbana, where 5 pairs of fathers and sons lined up in a row and used wooden buckets to pass water, drenching each other. There was even the first episode, where they played the game of breaking corn on a tall tower of corn cobs in a small, arid village in Shishan. At that time, the little girl was very fragile and loved to cry. She was so worried that her father would get hurt that she shed sad tears. Now she's grown up so much. Just as Poplar Fruit's thoughts were flying, Lin Yongjian suddenly shouted, "Split!" Instantly, the five fathers fell silent and looked at Lin Yongjian in a daze. "Teacher Lin, are you kidding me? Your favorite game is the split?" Even though the split was a game they played during their first trip, the pain it brought to the fathers was physical and mental torture. "Teacher Lin, have you forgotten?" The fathers all looked constipated, except for Lin Yongjian, who was still chuckling foolishly. Hu Jun waved his hand and said in horror, "Don't do the split, old Lin. If you really call for the split later, you can play it yourself." He looked so disgusted. Actually, Poplar Fruit didn't care much about the split. After all, his body's flexibility wasn't on the same level as the other fathers. However, he didn't want to play the game. The village chief chuckled, his expression clearly saying, "I'll show you later." He kept them in suspense and asked, "What else?" Village head, I want to play that game." He leaned forward and gestured with his hands. He trembled as he said, "There's a bench, and then we'll squeeze on it. I understand now. It's the game of squeezing the chairs. I used to play it in the Miao village at South Lake." Nuai's suggestion gave Hu Jun an idea. He smiled and said, "I feel that there's no need for something as tough as a split. Snatching the chair is a good idea." Although there was only a difference of one word, stools and chairs didn't count. Squeezing stools and snatching chairs were two different types of games. Snatching the chair is not bad. Lu Yi clapped his hands in agreement. Poplar Fruit also smiled and said, "I also think this is good." This reminded Poplar Fruit of the earliest episode. At that time, Kiki and Kong Kong fought until the end, but unfortunately lost. Then, Kiki burst into tears. At that time, she said something that touched Poplar Fruit for a long time. "But I want to win. I want to win, Kiki. Then, I want to eat it with Papa." That was the first time the little girl showed such a strong desire to win. Of course, Kiki also felt that this game was not bad. Wasn't she jumping around and shouting, "Snatch the chair, I want to play Snatch the Chair"? At this time, the village chief was about to announce the next game. However, at this time, there was a large group of foreigners standing at the side. No matter what, they had to understand the rules of the game, right? Therefore, the program team looked for Poplar Fruit. "Don't you have a translator?" Poplar Fruit pointed at the translator standing behind the director and asked in surprise. In fact, everyone could communicate in English on a daily basis. Only when there was a long speech would they need a translator. The effect is different. "Teacher Yang, we'll have to trouble you." The director smiled and explained. All right, they really had to make full use of every resource. Before they left, they asked the translator to explain to the foreigners, "This guest will help with the translation. You may not know him, but a month ago, he translated for our national leader, President Xi. Although there was no such thing as being used by the emperor abroad, and the president was not a big deal in their eyes, the foreigners working on the farm were somewhat surprised to be able to receive the same level of service as the president in real life. The way they looked at Poplar Fruit was different. It was much more enthusiastic than before. Poplar Fruit was not timid. He smiled and waved at the other party. He stood next to the village chief, slightly behind him, ready to play his second role in the program. "Well, my dear friends," he said, "we will first satisfy Mr. Lin Yongjian's request." "Okay." The village chief held back his smile and said mischievously. Half a beat later, Poplar Fruit followed the village chief's voice and translated. His voice was not loud and could not cover the village chief's voice, but it was clear enough for the foreigners on the other side to hear it clearly. The audience could also hear most of it, for words appeared in their minds. Simultaneous interpretation? That's right, it was the highest level of interpretation, simultaneous interpretation. For Poplar Fruit, this was actually just a small practice. The translation was not difficult at all. However, the threshold of simultaneous interpretation blocked 99% of English learners. Therefore, in the eyes of the audience, there was a sense of mystery. There was only one word in capital letters: awesome. However, the fathers did not care about how awesome Poplar Fruit's translation was. They were chilled by the village chief's smile and suddenly wailed, "Ah, you really want to satisfy me?" Lin Yongjian smiled innocently. The fathers next to him wanted to drag him to the back and beat him up on the grass. The rules of the split competition were that each side would send out an adult, then use their feet to clamp the small flag on the grass in a split position. The rules saved Lin Yongjian. With Poplar Fruit there, Lin Yongjian finally did not need to be pushed to the front of the competition. As for Poplar Fruit, everyone knew that his physical fitness was the best, so they did not hesitate to let him go out and challenge the opponent's long legs. The opponent was really tall. The average height of Westerners was above 175 meters, but this person was 185 meters. However, standing next to Poplar Fruit, he still felt a little lacking. There was no language barrier, and they were of similar age. Poplar Fruit and the opponent exchanged friendly greetings for a while. Both sides patted each other's shoulders and started the competition in a harmonious atmosphere. However, there was no suspense in this competition. Although Poplar Fruit went easy on him, he still pretended to cry out in pain. Then he got Lu Yi and the others to help him climb down on his feet to pick up the small flag. With his long legs, he was one step faster. Poplar Fruit won the split competition. Chapter 1477. Poplar Fruit won for his father's team. Immediately, the morale of the team was boosted. From the looks of it, we Chinese people are not completely at a disadvantage when it comes to our bodies. On Poplar Fruit's side, other than Zhou Shimin, who was a hindrance, they were all at least 175 meters tall. If you only looked at Poplar Fruit, Lu Yi, and Hu Jun, all three of them were at least 185 meters tall. Of course, Zhou Shimin was not bad other than his height. He was even an Olympic boxing champion. However, in the next match, the father's team would not be able to show their prowess. That was because the village chief had gotten someone to bring a long bench up. It was clearly to satisfy Nui's request of squeezing the bench. First, it was a warm-up exercise. Compared to the farm's children's calm expressions, Kong Kong and the rest were extremely enthusiastic as they warmed up, twisting left, twisting right, swinging their arms, shaking their butts, push-ups, sit-ups. The 5 children were messing around as they laughed nonstop. It was as if they were warming up before the match. From the live audience, it looked noisy, but the viewers in front of their televisions had a completely different feeling. Under the program team's editing, and with the accompaniment of a healthy song, the children's laughing expressions flashed across the screen. The comical feeling was no less than that of a comedy movie that was especially good at using camera angles. The audience was amused by the children, but the fathers were not at ease. The children were too stupid. They had already exhausted so much of their energy. How were they going to play the next match? Although it was the last episode, they had to enjoy the process of the game and not care about the outcome. Then, if it was a one-sided beating, what enjoyment would there be in the process? Squeezing the bench was not an easy game. It required the 5 children to work together. However, it was difficult for the children at the back to exert their strength by just relying on shoulder-to-shoulder contact. Hence, the arrangement of the team was very important. Kong Kong will sit in first place. Hu Jun was the oldest, so he was often the one making the decisions. He did not care if Kong Kong was his son, as he placed the oldest boy at the front. Kiki will be second, right? She's very strong. Poplar Fruit suggested. Nanua E is third. Dejun and Xian sit at the back. Hu Jun nodded and said. Kiki's monstrous strength was no longer a secret, and the little girl's performance no longer surprised them. His friends sat in a row, and they even hooked their arms around each other. They were already familiar with the place. Poplar Fruit was very happy to see that Kiki still had a sweet smile on her face. Although it was still winter in Australia, Kiki's smile was just like the season at this moment, making people who saw it feel as warm as a spring breeze. On the other side, the Caucasian children also held hands and crowded together, ready to fight. Get ready, said the village elder, waving his hand to give the order. Poplar Fruit didn't forget his task either. He dutifully translated for the other party. Begin. As soon as the village chief and Poplar Fruit finished speaking, the children huddled together. Come on, good luck. This time, Poplar Fruit, the translator, had nothing to do. He quickly threw himself into cheering for his daughter. Ha ha, ha. The little girl squeezed Brother Kong on her left while feeling the pressure from Brother Kong, but she couldn't help but laugh happily. In fact, the 5 little guys were the same. Although they all worked hard, they were affected by the atmosphere and the laughter of their friends. Even if they didn't laugh out loud, the smiles on their faces never stopped. Without watching the competition, just looking at the 5 innocent, pure, and cute smiling faces, the scene was beautiful. If only they could be taken out and photocopied into photos, how good would that be? However, Poplar Fruit and the others didn't have time to care at the moment. They were more anxious than the children, as if they were participating in a competition. Kong, push to the left harder, shouted Jun. Xian, you have to do it. This was Zhou Shimin. His face was as red as his son's, but he felt that Xian could use more strength, so he kept shouting behind his son. Poplar Fruit didn't rush his daughter, but clapped from behind. Kiki, good luck. Kiki, good job. However, the difference between Asians and Caucasians was still quite big. Moreover, the other party's children should be a little older than Chi-Chi's children, and they were also a little taller. Therefore, the situation was slowly tilting towards the other party. At this moment, Lu Yi suddenly had an idea. He clapped and said, Kong, Kiki, Nui Dajuan, Xian. Listen to me. Before he finished speaking, Kong had used too much strength and tried to squeeze through on his tiptoes. He didn't manage to push the others, but instead, he was squeezed out by Kiki and the other Caucasian child like a cream sandwich. It's fine. Continue. Jun pulled Kong back and let him take over from behind Xian to continue the competition. Lu Yi didn't give up. He continued shouting. Later, listen to the Father's commands. We will shout, push together, push together. When you hear a push, push together. It was a bit like the old era's chant. However, the effect should be very good. In the past, when they played tug-of-war games, everyone would push together according to the same rhythm. It would definitely be better than a messy team. The dads shouted in unison, let's push it together. Push together. The 2 words push together were shouted rather quickly, but they would pause for a moment before shouting with a more explosive voice. Push together. Push together. Push together. This kind of very rhythmic shout seemed to have added reinforced cement to the already precarious line of defense of the little guys. They quickly stabilized the situation. They didn't even need to think. As long as they followed the rhythm of the chant and pushed, their strength would be gathered and bring more trouble to the other party. Kiki was sandwiched in the middle. On her left was her opponent, a chubby Caucasian child. On her right were her little friends. The little girl felt uncomfortable being squeezed. However, she still worked very hard. Furthermore, she received encouragement from her little friends and gained strength. She maintained a happy smile as she pushed with all her might. Faintly, it seemed like the children were about to turn the tables. Could they really turn the tables? That was just a fantasy. The opponents were very strong, and they weren't idiots. Although they didn't speak the same language, they immediately learned Lu Ye's moves. Push, push, they shouted very rhythmically. When the other party's strength twisted into a rope, Kiki and the others couldn't hold on any longer. Chapter 1478. Working together, chanting songs, the atmosphere on the lawn was very lively. However, it was a pity that the advantage that Kiki and the other children had worked so hard to accumulate was not enough to turn the tables in the face of a strong opponent. The effect of the same method on the children in the father's team was far inferior to that of the white children. After all, they were not on the same level. The thinnest child was taller than Kiki, and the strongest or fattest child had arms thicker than Xianxian's thigh. On Chi-Chi's side, Chi-Chi could be considered a general with considerable combat strength, and Kong could barely be considered one as well. As for the rest, Dejun was too weak, just like his father. He wanted to help his friends, but he was powerless. Xianxian was not bad, but he was too young. He could only be considered half a fighter with potential. As for Nuai, this child was here to act cute. So, when Kiki and the others were forced to the edge of the bench, the village chief finally called the end of the competition. Poplar Fruit also loudly repeated in English. The white children cheered and jumped off the bench. Kong also regretfully let go of Xianxian. Kiki only recovered from the intense competition after hearing her father's words. When the village chief called the end of the competition, the little girl did not even notice. However, the remaining children were having fun. They were still yelling and using all their strength, especially Xianxian. Little chubby Xian had an unyielding spirit. The video of him getting up after falling down countless times on the grasslands was not staged. Xianxian clenched his little fist, his big face almost squeezed together. He yelled and tried to push to the left. Nuai, who was close to Kiki, felt that Kiki was not using any strength. He stopped in confusion, but Dejun and Xianxian did not. Xianxian used the most strength, forcing Dejun and Nuai to squeal as if they were about to fall. Kiki was also squeezed, but the little girl raised her head and looked at the photographer in front of her. She was beaming with joy, as if she thought it was fun. The game only ended when the dads managed to pacify Xianxian, who had gone berserk. There was nothing much to say about the winning side. Naturally, it was the farm kids who had the upper hand. Kiki and Kong were a little disappointed, but they didn't care too much about it. If I get it, I'll be lucky. If I don't, it's my fate. Of course, the children couldn't be so calm. However, after experiencing the torment of "Where's your dad?" countless times, the children's immunity had greatly increased. Next, the village chief asked people to move over 10 wooden stakes and place them in a circle. There was no need to guess what kind of competition this was. It really was chair snatching. Poplar Fruit and Hujun looked at each other and couldn't help but smile bitterly. They really didn't agree on this beforehand. However, if it weren't for the fact that they were filming the show themselves, they would have suspected that the guests were colluding with the production team. Obviously, the production team's creativity wasn't that simple. While the village chief was laughing weirdly, boxes of high heels were brought over. Next, it's our dad's chair snatching competition. The rules of the game are that every contestant has to wear high heels and walk around the big circle while listening to the music. The village chief introduced the rules. We have to wear high heels. A group of men wearing high heels? Poplar Fruit looked constipated as he reluctantly translated the rules. The white brothers on the farm were laughing so hard that they couldn't take it anymore. Each of them chose a pair of high heels that fit their feet. Poplar Fruit found that there were really high heels that fit his big feet. He really didn't know if the production team had ordered some men to make high heels that were suitable for men, or if they had sold out all the large high heels that couldn't be sold out. Poplar Fruit felt that it was very likely the latter. After putting on the high heels, not to mention the others, even Poplar Fruit himself was a little unsteady. It took a while for him to get used to it. Fortunately, it wasn't high. The height of the heel was only about 5 centimeters. "Papa, I'm worried. I'm worried that it will break." The little girl was very sensible. She held her father's hand and took care of him like she was taking care of an old man. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "It should be okay. Papa will be careful." Her father walked steadily. Kiki was still a little scared and said, "I think high heels are too scary. It must be very uncomfortable to walk." Hujun walked over and said with a smile, "Don't feel scared. You will wear them every day in the future." "Why? I don't like high heels." Kiki pouted and said unhappily, "Why? Was there a reason? Which woman didn't wear high heels?" Even Fong Bei, who was usually the most simple and didn't dress up, had 2 pairs of high heels in her shoe cabinet. Zhou Shimin staggered over and said with a smile, "I think Kiki may not need to wear high heels in the future. She will grow tall in the future. Why would she need to wear high heels?" Chi-Chi immediately became happy. She giggled and said, "That's right. I'll be able to grow taller in the future. I will be taller than Papa." "No, don't be taller than Papa. Poplar Fruit quickly waved his hand and said with a smile, Papa will be satisfied if you are 75 meters tall. In a domestic environment, it was difficult for tall girls to marry. If Kiki grew to 9 meters, wouldn't her boyfriend be at least 2 meters tall? Perhaps. Only Yao Ming's height was worthy of such a tall girl. However, Kiki would definitely grow tall in the future. Poplar Fruit himself was 88 meters tall, and Kiki's biological mother was not short either. Although Poplar Fruit didn't have much contact with her, he estimated that Wu Yu was at least 7 meters tall. With such an excellent gene combination, coupled with adequate nutrition since childhood, Kiki would definitely be more than 75 meters tall. Ho-ho! As long as the little girl didn't eat until she was fat, she would have a model-level figure when she grew up. However, Kiki didn't have any concept of this now. She blinked her big eyes in confusion, looked at her father, and asked, Papa, if I am so tall, do I still need to wear high heels? Wearing high heels or not has nothing to do with being tall. Poplar Fruit patted his daughter's little head and said with a smile, If you like it, wear it. If you don't like it, don't wear it. No one will force you. The little girl was happy. She immediately waved her hand and said, No, I don't like to wear it. Silly girl, when you grow up, you probably won't say that anymore. No matter how tall you are, which girl will be able to resist the temptation of high heels? In the world, there is no girl who will complain that her legs are too long, right? There is no such thing as the longest, only longer. You will know in the future. Chapter 1479. The competition began. The music started. It was melodious and rhythmic. That's right, it was the world-shaking, popular square dance song, the hottest ethnic trend. Hearing the tune, Poplar Fruit stumbled in his high heels and almost fell. Instead, Nui liked the song very much. He stood on the wooden stake next to him and danced with his hands and feet. He even danced with rich emotions. This caused a few of his little friends to follow suit and dance in a frenzy. Kiki, on the other hand, followed her father's footsteps excitedly. She giggled and imitated her father's twisted steps. As she walked, she wanted to take advantage of the chaos to squeeze into her father's line. Kiki, Poplar Fruit, could only turn his head and pat the little girl's shoulder. He smiled and said, It's not your turn yet. Don't come in. Daddy can't take care of you. All right then. Kiki then returned to her little friend's side. She also jumped and danced, but she did not go crazy like Nui and the others. The little girl was still very concerned about her father's competition. The dads walked in circles. The feeling of walking in high heels was very strange. It was as if they were forced to walk on their toes. The big strides that could have been very manly became awkward. Of course, this feeling of discomfort was the same for both the guest dads and the white dads. However, while the white dads were paying attention to their feet, the guest dads were focused on acting cute. Especially Lin Yongjian. His dance was like a little swan. He wished he could lift one of his feet above his head. Suddenly, the music stopped, and the team, which was originally very happy, suddenly returned to reality. Everyone hurriedly wriggled there, but to fight for a wooden stake chair. Poplar Fruit's eyes and feet were quick. His body flashed and rushed in front of a white guy to occupy a wooden stake. The latter could not say that Poplar Fruit stole his position because he was still a meter away from the wooden stake. Everyone sat down. The white guy who fought with Poplar Fruit for a wooden stake stood there stupidly. Lin Yongjian also did not get his own wooden stake in the father's team. Lin Yongjian had been dancing so happily just now that everyone had forgotten about his nickname, Black Hole. His reaction speed and even his luck were too bad. I'm out. He stood blankly in the middle for a while, then waved his hand in a carefree manner with a smile and left the competition circle. Papa is the best. Outside, Kiki was overjoyed. She ran to her father on the other side and threw herself into the arms of Poplar Fruit, who was still sitting on the wooden stake. Hee. Poplar Fruit also smiled proudly. He didn't care about anything else, but his daughter's praise was the best reward for him. There wasn't too much time for regret or happiness. A new round of the competition had begun. This time, there were only 5 wooden stakes left. This time, the song was Jiangnan style that the whole world was familiar with. The explosive sound came from a small speaker at the side, and the scene was instantly ignited. Under the influence of Jiangnan style, whether it was the guest fathers or the white dads, they all stepped on their high heels excitedly and danced passionately on horseback. The scene of them wearing high heels and dancing on horseback was too beautiful. Even the little guys beside them were laughing so hard that they couldn't stand straight. Kiki had to hold onto a wooden stake to stand firm. However, while everyone was happy, there were 2 people who seemed to be isolated from the world and were not affected at all. Nua, he hugged Kong Kong's shoulders from behind and hung himself on Kong Kong's big brother. He even shouted, "Wifey, wifey." Kong Kong could not stand the disturbance and escaped in a panic. This episode reminded the audience of Kong Kong and Dejun from the previous episode. It seemed that Kong Kong was still very loyal. After confirming that Dejun was his wife, he no longer accepted Nua Yi's pursuit. This time, the music seemed to last a lot longer. After gradually numbing everyone's nerves, it suddenly stopped. Poplar Fruit reacted the fastest and immediately grabbed a wooden stake. Then, the other dads also grabbed their spots. Zhou Shimin was very quick-witted. At first, he could not grab a wooden stake from the white dads, but when he turned around, he saw an empty wooden stake waving at him. When Zhou Shimin grabbed it, the 2 white dads who were huddled together on another wooden stake sighed. Why were they fighting among themselves? There was clearly an empty stake in front of them. If they had taken it first, Zhou Shimin would not have been able to grab it. However, among the people who were still standing, other than the 2 white dads, there was still Hu Jun. He pretended to look left and right, then waved his hand and shouted, I lost." As he said this, he was about to walk out. Lu Yi, who was most familiar with Hu Jun, felt that something was amiss. He raised his hand and pointed at Hu Jun with a smile. "Ah, senior bro, you lost on purpose, right?" Everyone looked at Hu Jun and happened to see the corner of his mouth under his simple and honest face. They immediately understood what was going on. Definitely. Poplar Fruit also joined in the commotion. Hu Jun laughed and didn't explain. He winked and slipped out of the room. They did not expect such a burly man to be so cunning. He clearly lost on purpose to get rid of the pain of wearing high heels. It was nothing much. After everyone made fun of Hu Jun for a while, the competition continued. Following that, there were only 3 wooden stakes left. The men in high heels circling them were also left with only 5 people. Zhou Shimin cleverly gestured. "If the 3 of us grab it, we'll win." It was a pretty good idea, but they had to do it. Although Poplar Fruit and company had the advantage in numbers, their opponents still had 2 people. This time, no one paid attention to the name and rhythm of the music. The 5 of them walked around, each with a heavy heart. They paid attention to the wooden stakes next to them and the followers who could very well become their opponents. The program team suddenly paused the music. It was shorter than the previous 2 times. Poplar Fruit quickly grabbed a wooden stake, as usual. However, this time, Poplar Fruit was careful. Not only did he not grab the wooden stake closest to him, he left it to Zhou Shimin, who was also very close to him. He moved his long legs and took a step to the wooden stake closest to the white dad and immediately sat down. Poplar Fruit's sudden appearance made the white dads panic for a moment. By the time they came back to their senses and went to look for the next wooden stake, Lu Yi had also managed to grab one with his cunning. Needless to say, Zhou Shimin easily accepted the fruit that Poplar Fruit left for him. Where was the applause? Where was the applause? Everyone had yet to come back to their senses. The dad's team had actually achieved a complete victory in the 3rd round. After the village chief announced it, the little rascals happily pounced over. Chapter 1480. Poplar Fruit, Zhou Shimin, and Lu Yi. The 3 of them had relied on their tacit understanding and Poplar Fruit's explosiveness to win the competition. Looking at their mischievous smiles, it felt like they were celebrating. They had no choice. They also wanted to win to their heart's content. One had to know that the father's team had never been good at playing games. At every stop, they would be tortured badly by the villagers. When had they ever achieved a perfect victory like today? This was the first time. Of course, when the children came over, they quickly reined in their smugness and became serious. Next was the children's turn to compete. When the village chief was announcing the rules, Kiki suddenly asked worriedly, "Village chief, do we have to wear high heels too?" The village chief did not react for a moment. The young lady added, "But I don't know how to wear high heels." Looking at her pitiful big eyes that were watery, even a heart of steel would melt. Right? The village chief understood and laughed out loud. He waved his hand and said, "I don't have high heels that suit you." Suddenly, the fathers all laughed. Everyone understood that Kiki was still worried about high heels. As he did not understand, a curious Caucasian father grabbed poplar fruit and asked as if they were very close, "Leon, what did they say?" "My daughter doesn't like wearing high heels, so I hope that the children won't wear high heels." This time, poplar fruit did not translate word by word. Instead, he simply paraphrased. Then, the host said that they don't have such small shoes. They instantly understood. The farm team also laughed. A young boy even mischievously jumped out and said, "Why? I want to wear high heels." My daughter beside him was even more interesting. She shouted, "Because you're not gay." Kiki heard it, but the young lady did not quite understand the joke. When everyone laughed again, she was still holding her father's hand in a daze. "It's fine. You don't need to understand it yet." Poplar Fruit smiled and patted his daughter's head. Compared to the secretive education of children in China, the exposure of foreign children was really fierce. The children's competition for the chairs began. The first song was very funny. It was actually a song about throwing green onions. This song was also a well-known international dance song. Even the white kids were waving their hands and twisting their arms with laughter. It looked like the Caucasian children were gradually getting used to the atmosphere of recording a show. They were even better at stealing the limelight than their fathers. Kiki was even more excited. She had learned the spring onion song on the dance floor at home. Although it was a comical dance choreographed by the netizens, Kiki's soft body was still very cute. In this segment, Kiki's performance definitely stole the limelight. She made her dads laugh so hard that they were convulsing with laughter. Her opponents also turned to look at her from time to time. However, dancing was just for fun. The ultimate goal of running in circles was to snatch the chair. But Kiki was dancing and having so much fun that she seemed to have forgotten about this. The music suddenly stopped and paused for half a second. Then, when everyone began to scramble for the chair, Kiki came back to her senses. If it was any other time, Kiki definitely would not have been able to snatch the chair because she was slower than the others by half a beat. But miraculously, at this time, luck was on the young lady's side. The two wooden poles in front and behind were being snatched by others, but the wooden pole next to Kiki was empty for almost a second. No one was snatching it from Kiki. When they turned back, Kiki had already sat down in a panic. The young lady patted her chest. She was still in shock and wanted to laugh, but was embarrassed. Luckily, Poplar Fruit gave her a thumbs up. Only then did Kiki calm down. She put her hands on the wooden pole between her legs and pressed her gauzy fake dress under her hands. She smiled sweetly. She had the vivacious attitude of a tomboy and the quiet elegance of a young lady. But this was also the reason why most of the audience liked Kiki so much. In the second round, Kiki was much more focused. Although the rhythm of the music made people have the urge to dance, Kiki endured it. The young lady with the same quick reaction managed to snatch the chair for this round. Among the remaining children, there were only Kiki, Kong Kong, and 3 other white children. If it wasn't for the clever editing of the show, the audience probably wouldn't have noticed this coincidence. Do you still remember? In the first episode, in Shishan, there was a game of snatching chairs. In the end, didn't Xian, Kiki, and a few farmer dads fight to the end? It was as if there was a cycle of reincarnation. Unlike before, the current Nuo, he wasn't as clingy to his father anymore. He could bravely face his own challenges. Xian didn't cry like before, and Kong Kong didn't dislike participating in such a childish game. There was also Kiki's change. The young lady could calmly face challenges and failures. Before the third round began, the small speaker seemed to have run out of battery. The village chief conveyed the show's temporary decision. You guys will sing the next song yourselves. After listening to Poplar Fruit's retelling, the dads on the farm smiled and said to Poplar Fruit, "Hey, Leon, give us some English songs." Indeed, there were too many Chinese songs. Although they were all divine songs, they couldn't understand them. But it seemed like they had found the wrong person. Letting Poplar Fruit lead the song? He couldn't even sing well. That song. Kiki jumped out happily. She pulled her father's hand and shook it. If you're happy and you know it's clap your hands. Poplar Fruit instantly understood. This was a song that Kiki learned from school and sang for him when she came back. The Chinese version was also very famous in China. If you feel happy, clap your hands. Poplar Fruit had heard this clap your hands happy song many times when he was young. But it was the first time that Poplar Fruit heard the English version of Poplar Fruit. So, Poplar Fruit excitedly went to look for information. He found out that the song wasn't Chinese at all. It wasn't even English. It came from a Spanish children's song. And if he continued to look into it, the song might have come from the former Soviet Union in the 1930s. Well, there was no need to go so far. Now, Kiki had given her father a very good choice. Poplar Fruit only needed to sing for the children to continue playing games. Poplar Fruit ran to the middle of the wooden pile, clapped his hands gently, and sang, "If you're happy and you know it's clap your hands." At first, Poplar Fruit was a little shy, but soon Poplar Fruit, who had been a teacher for so long, adjusted. He raised his hands high, clapped his hands, and continued to sing loudly. If you're happy and you know it's clap your hands. Chapter 1481. The song that Poplar Fruit sang was not very pleasant to the ears. Luckily, it was not out of tune, but because it was so common, it resonated with everyone. The children followed the rhythm of Poplar Fruit's hand clapping happily. A few of the Caucasian fathers even clapped and sang along with Poplar Fruit. Of course, Lu Yi and the rest did not show any weakness. They immediately remembered the Chinese lyrics and sang along happily. In this joyous atmosphere, the results of the competition did not seem to be important. Although the third round was over, Kiki, Kong Kong, and a little boy were still left behind. However, the village chief cleverly announced the end of the competition. He waved a bunch of lollipops and rushed forward. He happily shouted in the middle of the group of children, "I announce that the winners today are the children from our father's team and the children from our farm's team." Poplar Fruit also translated, "All the children will receive a lollipop as a reward." The last sentence raised the atmosphere to its peak. The children, whether it was Kiki and the Caucasian children, all jumped up in excitement. They cheered, screamed, and hugged. It looked like sweet and delicious candies and beautiful lollipops were all children's favorites. This had nothing to do with the difference in skin color. The sports meet had ended, but the excitement did not stop. The fathers and children were even invited by the farm owner, Steve, to sit on the farm's trailer and take a look around his farm. Then, they returned to their small villa. Speaking of which, this episode was really easy. At least they were living in a modern mansion, and they did not have to work hard to fight for a house. Back at their residence, Poplar Fruit and the rest did not have to worry about how to boil water or tidy up the bed. They could directly take the little rascal, who had a head full of grass, to the bathroom for a bath. Even more blissful was that the five fathers did not have to worry about dinner tonight. After they bathed, changed, tidied up, and went downstairs, the program crew was already waiting for them. Poplar Fruit was dragged downstairs by Kiki. After taking a bath, the little fellow put on a satin dress. Originally, it was pajamas, but because it was a little cold, she put on a white coat. Then, with her long hair hanging loose, she went around barefoot. She even followed Nuyi and the others downstairs energetically. When she saw the scene outside, Kiki ran up excitedly and pulled Poplar Fruit, who was still buttoning his shirt, outside. "Papa, hurry up, hurry up. After taking a bath, Kiki's little face became even more delicate and cute. She smiled brightly and excitedly said, "There's a lot of delicious food. What's the hurry? No one is fighting with you for it." Poplar Fruit laughed, bent down, and fiercely hugged the little girl's waist, causing her to cry out in surprise. Then, she leaned on her father's shoulder and giggled. Her hair was scattered, some hanging on her face, some hanging on Poplar Fruit's back, and some naughtily drilling into Poplar Fruit's neck. That wet and slippery feeling was an indescribable joy. After going downstairs, Poplar Fruit put Kiki down. Of course, this was also strongly requested by Kiki herself. The little girl had grown up and rarely pestered her father to carry her. More often than not, she wanted to be able to run around by herself. It seemed that this kind of freedom was very good. However, Poplar Fruit was still a little disappointed. Occasionally, he would miss the time when the little girl was young. She was still a little girl and could not leave his arms every day. As long as Poplar Fruit put her down, she would cry loudly. Those days were gone forever. Of course, no matter how clingy a child was, there would be a time when they grew up. Poplar Fruit only felt that it was a pity that Kiki grew up too quickly. Perhaps in the future, when he had a new little fellow with Fong Bei Bei, Poplar Fruit would once again be able to recall that kind of happiness of being needed all the time, right? Of course, Kiki was still sticking to her father. Although she did not want her father to carry her, when she went out, the little girl was reserved for a moment and did not run crazily anymore. Instead, she stood beside her father like a little lady and stuffed her little hand into her father's big hand. Today's dinner was super sumptuous. A long table was filled with all kinds of Western barbecue, seafood chowder, vegetable salad, fruit platter, and so on. There were also bouquets of decorative flowers and candlesticks. The faint and bright flames looked so charming under the night sky. However, the little fellows seemed to only pay attention to the delicious food. Poplar Fruit and Kiki greeted the village head, Hu Jun, and Kong Kong, who had already finished their meal and came over early. They pulled out chairs and sat down. The little girl leaned over to her father's ear and said, "Papa, look, isn't it super delicious?" "Oh, yes. Later, you can eat whatever you like. Just treat it as a buffet," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "I like to eat buffets." Kong Kong ran over and leaned on the table to chat with Poplar Fruit and Kiki. She said, "The last time we went to a buffet together, there was so many delicious food. You can order whatever you want. I've eaten before. Little fat lamb, big fat cow, and seafood buffet." The little girl said with great familiarity. Her memory was much better than Kong Kong's. The previous experience of Poplar Fruit taking her out for a meal was still vivid in her mind. "Aya, you're making me want to eat," Kong Kong said with a smile. Of course, they had to wait for everyone to come down before they started eating together. Soon, the other fathers and children gathered together, and their seats were changed several times. In the end, the children sat in groups of 2 or 3 while the fathers squeezed in. Before eating, the village head gave a small task to the fathers. While they were thinking, the lively dinner finally began. The little fellows were still there, and the atmosphere was lively. They were all shouting about what they wanted to eat, or jumping down themselves and running around with plates. It was as if everyone was really eating a Manchu Han imperial feast with so many delicacies. In fact, the taste of these dishes was average. The barbecue was the taste of meat that had been roasted, the vegetables were the taste of vegetables and salad, and the seafood was the original taste. Compared to the various cooking methods and seasoning techniques in China, these dishes were really lacking. He didn't know what the other fathers were thinking. Poplar Fruit cooked by himself, so he was picky. After eating a few mouthfuls, he felt that he couldn't eat anymore, so he simply ate fruits. However, the little fellows seemed to like it very much. Kiki ate the barbecued meat in big mouthfuls, and even filled up a big bowl of vegetable salad. As for Nua Yi, it was even worse. Hu Jun gave him a piece of barbecued chicken wing, and he kept mumbling about how good he was, making Lu Yi jealous. "Village head, are you hungry? Why don't you have some too?" While eating happily, Kiki did not forget her favorite village head. The kind little girl even used a fork to fork a big piece of meat and gave it to the village head. "Oh, it's really delicious. Thank you, Kiki." The village head ate in big mouthfuls, and as he chewed, he gave a thumbs up. His eyes were shining with gratitude. Chapter 1482. It was time for a wave of sensationalism. Dear dads and darlings, seeing that everyone was almost done eating, the village chief stood at the side of the long table and said with a smile, "This is the third season of Where Are We Going, and the last dinner in our entire trip." The village chief choked up a little. He seemed to have realized that the atmosphere had also affected him. He coughed twice and said, "Does everyone have a lot of thoughts now?" "Yes," Dejun said loudly. This kid suddenly echoed, causing the village chief and his dad to be stunned. Lin Yongjian looked at his son with some doubt. "Then Dejun, tell us your thoughts." The village chief laughed. I finally don't have to listen to them speak English," Dejun said to everyone's surprise. He was very engrossed in it. "It's so ugly and fast that I'm about to faint." His voice was dragged out. It could be seen that he had been suppressing his depression for the past 2 days. Poplar Fruit and the others all laughed. The village chief also smiled helplessly. He originally wanted to sensationalize, but now he was led astray by Dejun. "I can help you." Kiki raised her fork and laughed happily. Poplar Fruit secretly pressed down the fork in the little girl's hand. It was impolite. Forget it. I feel like I'm about to faint." Dejun spread out his hands and then hung his head on the back of the chair. The dads all laughed. They laughed at Dejun for being too young and insensible. He was actually annoyed with such a beautiful girl serving him. Kiki did not understand. She also giggled, but she was a little confused. Actually, the village chief wanted to express that there was a problem. He wanted to use the last dinner as a tear-jerking point. However, the dads understood, but the little ones did not listen at all. What was the last dinner? There was still breakfast tomorrow. Until they truly bid farewell to each other, they probably wouldn't know that every second that passed was a second less. Each of us will use a song to express our current feelings. The village chief laughed. He finally turned the topic back. This small segment was something that they had discussed with their fathers before. They had asked them to prepare their respective songs so that there wouldn't be an awkward silence. "Come on, I'll sing first," Jun said confidently. He stood up with a glass of wine in his hand and prepared to sing. "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you." In front of him, Dejun, Xian, and Kong Kong were playing with a big cake in the middle of the table. Then they suddenly started singing. Jun opened his mouth, but in the end, it was snatched away. He said helplessly, "Forget it. I've seen people steal the show, but I've never seen people steal the singing." Starting over, Jun stopped brewing this time. He raised his wine glass and sang, "Where's happiness? Happiness is here. This song is quite old." Poplar Fruit opened his mouth. Although he could tell that Jun's singing was not very good and was even off-key than him, and the lyrics were not accurate, he could still tell the origins of this song. "Where is Happiness" was a song that was older than Poplar Fruit. In the early 1980s, it was performed by the older generation of singers, Teacher Ian, at the Spring Festival Gala, and became popular. However, Poplar Fruit had heard it from his parents' collection of cassettes, and, at the scene, probably only people from Jun's and Lin Yongjin generation would be familiar with this song. Even Liu Yi and Zhou Shimin, who were born a few years before this song, might not even know this song. Hence, everyone was very confused. Then, when they heard Jun tampered with the lyrics, "Wherever the father goes, the child will follow," they laughed and clapped. Jun had made a good start, even though the children did not pay much attention to him. The energetic boys were already running around and making a ruckus. Only Kiki, who had not eaten her fill, sat beside her father like a lady and listened to the adults sing. "Sing about my current mood, Last Supper." Liu Yi also stood up, but no one knew that this joker would sing the following song that did not match the tune. "Tonight's cold wind has torn my heart to shreds. Hurried footsteps, I won't return until I'm drunk." Liu Yi even lifted one hand and strummed the other in front of him, as if he was playing a guitar. "The hazy drizzle has its hazy beauty, Another cup of wine. Especially good. Especially good. We've reached the climax. Jun smiled as he stood up. He raised his wine glass and drank a toast. At this part, the fathers were feeling a little emotional, but the children were still giggling, as if they did not feel the sadness of their father's parting. This was also right. Lu Ye's song, The Man in Pain, seemed to be sung for the five fathers. Over the past few trips, although they were busy taking care of the children, they had a lot of communication. They had even left the five fathers of the children to do missions several times, which made them very good brothers, regardless of whether the age gap was a little big or not. Between brothers, shouldn't they drink and cry? Poplar Fruit's eyes were a little red. The little rascal did not notice. She grinned and smiled brightly. Papa, I think Uncle Lu Yi sings very well. Seeing the commotion, the village chief smiled and looked at Poplar Fruit, saying, Next, it's Poplar Fruit's turn. Poplar Fruit stood up with his wine glass raised in embarrassment. He smiled and said, Everyone knows that my singing isn't very good. The fathers all laughed. Kiki was also laughing uncontrollably. The little rascal really did not give her fathers any face. However, this was also something that everyone knew. The netizens even gave Poplar Fruit a nickname, Singing God. It meant that he was a singing lunatic. His tune was not something that a normal person could sing. It's all right. No matter what you sing today, we will listen to it. The fathers all clapped to encourage Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, All right, I've also prepared a simpler song. It's a song that we all know when we graduate from school outside the pavilion, beside the ancient road, fragrant green grass. Poplar Fruit finally did not go out of tune. This song was like a drawn-out poem. It couldn't be any simpler. If Poplar Fruit still sang it wrong, Venerable Hongi would probably jump out from the ground and knock on his head. This song was too familiar. Almost everyone in China who had studied would be able to hum it. A goblet of turbid wine consumes the remaining joy. Farewell to the cold dreams tonight. In this poetic lyrics and sad tune, Poplar Fruit's gentle singing was like the night breeze. It was very gentle, but it captured everyone's hearts. Hi, in the end, it still had to end. Just like this song, just like this season's program, just like this book. Papa, I feel so bad. Kiki's face was covered in tears. She grabbed her father's pants and said with a choked voice. Chapter 1483. The little girl's reaction was completely different from Kong Kong and the rest. The boys were going crazy from playing. They were chasing after each other like four demon kings. On the other hand, Kiki's sad narration and her watery eyes that looked like they were about to cry made the fathers surprised. Then, they could not help but laugh. What are you sad about? Poplar Fruit also laughed. He patted the little girl's head and asked, Do you understand what Daddy is singing? To be honest, this song was very abstract. It was like an ancient Chinese poem. It used scenery to express emotions and objects to describe people. It did not even have the word sorrow, but it filled every note with sorrow. People who did not have a deep understanding of ancient Chinese or did not have a deep understanding of Chinese would find it difficult to understand. No matter how smart Chi-Chi was, she was only a little over 4 years old. How could she understand the deep emotions hidden behind words so thoroughly? I don't understand. The little girl pouted and shook her head, saying, But I feel very touched. Ha ha ha. It's right to be touched. It's right to be touched. Poplar Fruit and the rest laughed again. Kiki was too cute. She could hear the emotions in the tone. It was vague, but made her heart ache. It was not easy to see such an adorable contrast between the two of them. Poplar Fruit saw his daughter's puzzled look and gently smiled at her, saying, It's fine. You will understand in the future. The reason why he didn't explain it to Chi-Chi wasn't because Chi-Chi wasn't that old yet, but because he didn't really want the little fellow to cry her eyes out right now. How nice would it be if she could laugh heartlessly like No-E in a June? All right, who's next? The village chief smiled. Hu Jun's ancientness, Lu Ye's exuberance, and Poplar Fruit's profoundness all had their own characteristics. The audience did not pay much attention to this segment at the beginning, but at this moment, the viewership ratings gradually rose. Everyone was very curious about how the fathers would perform next. Teacher Lin. Zhou Shimin smiled. He's prepared a wonderful performance, really. Lin Yongjian did not decline. He stood up with the wine in his hand. He still looked like an old cadre, but he spread out his hands and said in a friendly manner, "I'm going to sing this song. May our friendship last forever." The name of the song was Auld Lang Syne. It had a very good meaning. "Where are you going, Daddy?" Before everyone could react, Lin Yongjin's bel canto voice stunned everyone. However, why was the lyrics a bit wrong? "Papa, where are you going?" "We have to finish recording. We have to go home." It was the same way that Hu Jun had altered the lyrics. But it sounded much better than Hu Jun's. Teacher Lin's bel canto voice had a certain charm to it. It was very pleasant to listen to. Of course, there was still a lack of energy, but this did not stop everyone from quietly enjoying it. Even the boys who were exuberant stopped and looked at him to listen. "But we feel a little reluctant to part with you, friends. Friends, let's drink together and sing together." Listening to Teacher Lin's singing, the fathers picked up their wine glasses and stood up one after another. There were signs of tears rolling in their eyes. "Long live our friendship. Our friendship will never change. Our friendship will last forever." Very miraculously, the little girl was not touched. She really did not understand at this time. Of course, she still gave a thumbs up to Teacher Lin's singing. "Let's make our friendship last forever." Hu Jun raised his glass and proposed. The dads all drank their glasses. Logically speaking, the singing here had already reached the peak of the atmosphere. It should have come to an end. However, wasn't Zhou Shimin not singing yet? The village chief chuckled and said, "I really want to hear you sing, Shimin." Zhou Shimin actually did not have any good ideas. Moreover, with Lin Yongjin in front of him, the other songs he sang were not up to standard. However, Zhou Shimin, who had a high EQ, immediately had an idea. He said emotionally, "Perhaps after tonight's dinner, after we finish recording the show tomorrow, this season will really end." Kiki looked at Zhou Shimin with her mouth slightly agape. This time, she seemed to have understood. "If it's possible, everyone can sing the last line of our theme song together," Zhou Shimin suggested. This line was very familiar to everyone because they had once spent a lot of effort in the recording room to sing this line. "Baby, baby," Zhou Shimin started. Everyone could not help but sing. They went from soft voices to loud voices. With a wave of the hand of time, "You are forever precious." Time passed too quickly. It was as if a few months ago was just the beginning. At that time, everyone had just gotten to know each other through their first journey. Then, they had already become good friends. At that time, everyone was still very happy. Even when they sang this line, they sang it with a happy mood. Unlike now, when they were singing, they were thinking about parting. They were thinking about the deep friendship they had formed over the past few episodes. And all of this was just like the lyrics. "You are forever precious." Although the lyrics were talking about the babies, the friendship between fathers and children, wasn't it just as precious? Everyone sang with all their might. It was unknown how many of them were like Lin Yongjian, pulling out the last note with their eyes closed. They closed their eyes because tears were welling up in their eyes. They dragged out the notes because they did not want it to end for a long time. Dinner was over. The children were also tired from playing. Finally, they followed their fathers back to their rooms. They were considered to be more fortunate because they were not able to feel the deep sorrow of parting. Of course, Kiki was an exception. The little girl cried for a while at the end. Poplar Fruit returned to the room and fetched hot water for the little girl to wash her face and hands. Under the warm towel, Kiki's pink little face and red eyes faded away. "What is this?" Kiki was lying on the bed with her little feet dangling behind her. She curiously pulled over a big book that her father had brought back and asked, "It's our photo." After Poplar Fruit put the things away, he sat down next to his daughter and patted the bed. The little girl consciously turned over and then burrowed into her father's arms like a little worm. He opened the book, or more accurately, the album. On the first page, Poplar Fruit saw the first photo of him and Kiki. "Do you remember this one?" Poplar Fruit smiled. "You were dressed like a princess." Yes, yes. Kiki smiled happily. Xian even helped me lift my skirt. Yes. And this one too. Poplar Fruit turned a page and said, Dad was not with you. You and Brother Kong Kong went to do a task. Yes, we went to sell ducklings. A duckling almost died. Kiki was a little nostalgic and smiled happily. But Papa, do you know? That duckling didn't die. It came back to life later. Poplar Fruit nodded and looked at the little girl with a smile. Chapter 1484. Talking about photos, Poplar Fruit and his daughter could talk for a few hours. That was because the photos in the album contained many stories. Poplar Fruit and Kiki's memory was still super strong, so the conversation was a bit endless. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit also remembered a small task given by the production team. At an appropriate time, Poplar Fruit cut in and asked, Kiki, after the show is over, will you miss Kong Kong, Dajuan, No, and Xian? Yes. Kiki's voice was a little low. It was unknown whether it was because she was tired or because she couldn't lift her spirit. The little girl put her small hand in between her father's big hand, then used her other hand to pull her father's fingers and let him hold her small hand. I will miss them very, very much, Kiki said softly. But didn't Papa say before? Even if we don't record the show, we can still meet and play together in the future. Poplar Fruit smiled and nodded. Yes, if there's a chance in the future, Papa will bring you to play with them. Kiki was tired. She had played very happily today. Moreover, she had just come back after 9 o'clock. The younger Xian and Nua were so tired that they fell asleep on their father's shoulders and were then carried back. Kiki's physical fitness was better, but she couldn't avoid it. After coaxing the little girl to sleep, Poplar Fruit took the phone that he had asked for when the production team distributed the photo album. He walked out the door, passed through the corridor, and went to the balcony outside. He wanted to call Fong Bei. Usually, he had nothing to do at home, but now, Fong Bei had come to Australia with him. Although the production team's staff and the other children's mothers were accompanying them, they were still unfamiliar with this place. Poplar Fruit had to be concerned. In the end, when he turned on his phone, a bunch of text messages kept ringing. Usually, whenever he recorded a show, there would be a lot of missed calls. However, this time, Yang Wushun looked at it and found that Zheng Yujie had called him so many times that his phone almost exploded. Starting from 12 o'clock in the afternoon, he called every few minutes until 5 o'clock in the evening. What happened? Poplar Fruit was shocked. He knew that Zheng Yujie was not the kind of person who would call nonstop. In the past, whenever Poplar Fruit turned off his phone and refused to answer her calls, the cold and aloof Sister Zheng would throw her phone aside and wait for Poplar Fruit to call back. In the end, Poplar Fruit would apologize obediently. Based on her personality, she wouldn't be so agitated unless something big had happened. Poplar Fruit was also a little flustered. He called Zheng Yujie back first. It was 10 o'clock. There was no time difference between Beijing and Perth, so it should be 10 o'clock in Guangzhou as well. Plus, Zheng Yujie definitely wasn't asleep at this time. Beep, beep, beep. The phone rang for a long time. Poplar Fruit anxiously shouted in his heart, "Hurry up and answer the phone." Finally, just as the phone was about to hang up, Zheng Yujie's voice finally came from the receiver. Hello. It wasn't the slightly confused hello that most people would say on the phone. Instead, it was a slightly raised hello that sounded a little happy and a little angry. What happened? Poplar Fruit heard Zheng Yujie's voice. It sounded like there was no big problem. His hanging heart was half relieved. He asked, "Why did you call me hundreds of times? You still have the nerve to say that." On the other end of the phone, Zheng Yujie seemed to heave a sigh of relief. She immediately returned to her usual tone and said, "I called you this morning, but you didn't answer. My phone was turned off. How was I supposed to answer it?" Poplar Fruit laughed. "How would I know?" Zheng Yujie said rudely. She then stammered, "I called you this morning, and I called you this afternoon. Your phone was turned off. Who knows, did you blacklist me?" Poplar Fruit checked his phone. There were too many text messages. Only now did he realize that Zheng Yujie had called him this morning. What Poplar Fruit didn't know was that Zheng Yujie had called him yesterday as well. However, at that time, Poplar Fruit's phone had been turned off and taken away by the program crew. Zhang Yujia panicked when she realized that Poplar Fruit's phone was still turned off in the afternoon. Not only did she call him the whole afternoon, she even hid at home at night. Her eyes were swollen from crying. This was something that Poplar Fruit didn't know. I didn't record the show. I'm still in Perth. Poplar Fruit laughed. Don't worry, I won't block you. Why would I block you? Poplar Fruit didn't understand why Zhang Yujia was suddenly so sensitive. Wasn't it because Poplar Fruit was a little too cold to Zhang Yujia? After the quarrel, he didn't call Zhang Yujia. Although this was also because he was very busy, had guests at home, and had to go abroad. Where is Perth? Zhang Yujia changed the topic. It's in Australia, a big city in Western Australia. Poplar Fruit laughed. Kiki and I even pretended to be primitive people. Poplar Fruit described their experience in Western Australia. Of course, Poplar Fruit also deliberately avoided the sensitive topic of Phong Bei Bei. I want to watch this episode. Zhang Yujia laughed. Maybe I want to come to Perth for a vacation in the future. Maybe you won't want to come to this place in the future, because someone will show off their love here. Well, back to the topic. Poplar Fruit asked puzzledly, You called me. Is there something urgent? Yes. But can't I call you if there's nothing urgent? Zhang Yujia said with a raised voice. She found that Poplar Fruit was still the original Poplar Fruit, so she felt relieved. Hey, that's not what I meant. If you have something to say, just say it. Yanghua helplessly smiled. Zhang Yujia stopped fooling around and said seriously, There's a meeting next Friday. You have to come back to the company. Friday? Poplar Fruit was a little embarrassed. Tomorrow was Monday, and he wanted to stay in Australia for the next week. It was rare to have a vacation with Phong Bei Bei. The beach, the coast, what a great vacation spot. Why, you can't come back. Zhang Yujia sensed it and said, This meeting is very important. The country is going to introduce a support policy for the translation of literary works, and we are included in the first batch of pilot enterprises. It was the first time Poplar Fruit heard about this. This is a very important opportunity for us. We have to use this opportunity to develop ourselves quickly, and it's best if we can seize the right to speak in this industry. Do you understand? Zhang Yujia was not joking with Poplar Fruit. This matter was quite important. Got it. I'll give you an answer after the recording tomorrow. Okay? Poplar Fruit said helplessly to Zhang Yujia. He had to explain this to Phong Bei Bei first. If this was the case, their vacation would be ruined. Chapter 1485. Okay. Sister Zheng snapped her fingers, and it was as if the cold night of Perth was shaken by it. However, she did not intend to let Poplar Fruit go. After knowing that she was overthinking, Zhang Yujia said in a relaxed mood, Okay. It's still early, right? It's almost 11 o'clock here. I'm going to sleep. It's 11 o'clock in Perth, okay? Also, when did you start sleeping so early? Poplar Fruit could not complain, but Zhang Yujia did not give him the chance to. She quickly said, That's all. Go do your work. I'll see you in my office on Friday. Then, the phone beeped and hung up. Poplar Fruit looked at his phone helplessly. He really did not know what to do with her. He had not even agreed, and she had already taken the lead. After calming himself down, Poplar Fruit called Phong Bei Bei. After a call with Zhang Yujia, it was indeed 11 o'clock, and Phong Bei Bei was about to go to sleep. So, when Poplar Fruit called, as expected, Phong Bei Bei had already fallen asleep, and her voice was heavy with tiredness. Uncle, baby, are you going to sleep? Poplar Fruit asked. Phong Bei Bei groaned, but it was a little nasal, and Poplar Fruit was sharp enough to hear it. Why do I hear that your nose is a little stuffy? Poplar Fruit asked with concern. I went out to play in the afternoon, and I seem to have caught a cold. Phong Bei Bei said. Are you still filming? It's so late. You must be tired. She was also concerned about Poplar Fruit. No, today's filming is over. Kiki is also sleeping. I asked the crew for a phone. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. I thought you would come in the afternoon. Kiki had a lot of fun on the farm. Hihi, let me tell you. There will be a big surprise tomorrow. Phong Bei Bei finally became a little more spirited. She laughed in a muffled voice. Although her nose was stuffed, Her happy mood was still transmitted through the airwaves. Really? Poplar Fruit smiled. I'm suddenly looking forward to tomorrow. We spent the whole day yesterday. I can't tell you so much, or else I'll spoil it. Fong Beibei said. Ugh, ugh. Before he could finish his sentence, Poplar Fruit suddenly heard Fong Beibei vomiting. Poplar Fruit became anxious. Baby, what's wrong? It's fine, it's fine. It's not serious, Fong Beibei said. It seems that it's because of the seafood I ate yesterday. I don't have a good appetite today. The lobsters we sent. Poplar Fruit asked in confusion. Yes, Fong Beibei said. We don't seem to have any problems. Everyone ate it, Poplar Fruit said with a frown. Do you feel a stomachache? No, the other sisters didn't feel any problems either. Fong Beibei comforted Poplar Fruit and said, maybe it's because we ate too late and ate it as a midnight snack, so we had indigestion. But you also caught a cold. You have a stomachache again. Poplar Fruit said nervously. You have to go to the hospital. Stupid uncle. Although Fong Beibei's voice was muffled, the sweetness in her voice almost attracted bees. It's late at night. Where can I go to see a doctor? Poplar Fruit thought for a while and said, do you want me to pick you up? He felt that his language was not a problem, so it was much better than troubling the other members of the program team. Fong Beibei said, no need. I'm so sleepy. I want to sleep. This coquettish behavior was comparable to Kiki's. Poplar Fruit raised his eyebrows and wanted to insist, but Fong Beibei said, don't worry, don't worry. I'm really fine. The cold is not serious. It's just that my nose is a little blocked and my stomach doesn't hurt. I just feel a little nauseous. Maybe it's because I'm not acclimatized. If it's really serious, I won't hide it from you. Then after the program recording tomorrow, I'll take you to the hospital for a checkup, Poplar Fruit said after thinking for a while. Indeed, there was no need to make a fuss. He was a little worried just now. Okay, Fong Beibei said. Then you should rest early and cover yourself with a quilt, Poplar Fruit said. Okay. Fong Beibei replied with her actions. Poplar Fruit heard the sound of her moving the quilt through the phone. I'm covered, Fong Beibei said sweetly. Uncle, you should go to bed early too. Okay, good night, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Good night, Fong Beibei said and hung up the phone. After putting down the phone, Poplar Fruit went back to his room. Only then did he remember that he didn't tell Fong Beibei that he wanted to go home early. However, he quickly shook his head and didn't care too much. It was still early. He would talk about it after the program recording tomorrow. Compared to going back early for the meeting, Poplar Fruit was more concerned about, or rather, worried about Fong Beibei's health. The night passed quickly. Early in the morning, when the sky was just beginning to brighten, Poplar Fruit got up to exercise. He ran to the small rooftop. The place was just right, so he didn't need to disturb the staff's rest. More than an hour later, Poplar Fruit saw a bus coming from afar under the golden light of the rising sun. Poplar Fruit suddenly had a premonition. He quickly jumped down the stairs. He didn't put on his shoes properly, so he ran out on his heels. Someone had already come down. When Poplar Fruit went out, he saw Fong Beibei coming down from the bus with a smile. The smile on Poplar Fruit's face was as bright as the sunlight jumping between the branches and leaves of the small forest in front of him. He opened his arms and hugged Fong Beibei, who was jumping up to greet him. The filming hadn't started yet. Other than the cameraman who came with the bus and took 2 photos, the cameras in the villa and in the car hadn't been turned on yet. But why would they need these extra bystanders? Love was contained in the hearts of the 2 people. It was expressed in the eyes of the other person, and there was no more mixing. Do you feel better? Poplar Fruit asked gently. Fong Beibei said happily, listen to my voice. Her nose was not blocked, and her voice was clear and pleasant. How about your stomach? It's also better. It's just that I don't really want to eat seafood now. Fong Beibei pouted and said, it's a pity, a pity. It was indeed a waste to come to Western Australia, where there was so much seafood to eat, but they couldn't eat seafood. Poplar Fruit laughed and said, well, when you're completely better, I'll cook more delicious food for you when we get home. It was a bit too much of a show of affection. Lu Fong coughed twice and said, hey, there's a child here. She didn't know if they had considered the existence of the child when they were showing affection in the later part of the program. Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei hadn't kissed yet. The two of them just hugged each other. Hearing Lu Fong's words, Poplar Fruit and Fong Beibei changed to holding hands. He smiled and said, "Good morning, sisters-in-law. And also, Junina, Hao. Hello." Nina and Hao had just woken up and were in a confused state, so they didn't respond. But the eldest girl, Jiu openly greeted Poplar Fruit. Chapter 1486. The arrival of the group of mothers brought fresh and lively air to the sleepy villa. Of course, that was after a round of laughter. Except for Poplar Fruit, who always got up early, the other four fathers were still curled up in their warm beds. There was no shooting in the morning, so they slept in. With a smirk on his face, Poplar Fruit pointed to the rooms where each family was. Then, ignoring the surprised and happy cries behind him, he pulled his wife and ran back to his room with a smile. Mama, Kiki, who had slept enough, was woken up by the noise of the door opening. The little girl poked her head out of the bed, squinted her eyes, and screamed in surprise. "Kiki, you're awake?" Fong Beibei threw Poplar Fruit down and threw herself on the bed with a smile. She looked at the little girl's big eyes and laughed together. "Mama, you're here so early." The little girl reached out and hung it around Fong Beibei's neck. She pressed her body on the bed and stretched lazily. Then she giggled. "I came to see you. Mama missed you and Papa. Did you miss Mama?" Fong Beibei laughed. Kiki nodded and said seriously, "I missed you so much." "My dear Mama, let's see if you're telling the truth," Fong Beibei said with a smile, and then got a kiss from Kiki. Of course, she immediately responded. Poplar Fruit was not to be outdone. He put aside the suitcases brought by Fong Beibei, climbed up, and said with a smile, "I missed you so much too." Fong Beibei pressed one hand on Poplar Fruit's chest, separated him, and said with a naughty smile, "No, you're sweaty. Go take a shower, Go. Go. The little girl burrowed into Fong Beibei's arms. Now that she had someone to rely on, she waved at her father and smiled secretly. "Why didn't you say anything when you hugged me just now?" What was with the look of disdain in front of the child? Poplar Fruit complained in his heart. Of course, he also knew that he was sweating profusely after exercising. This was an indisputable fact. And Kiki, the little guy, had learned bad things. After having a mother, he really didn't want his biological father anymore. Poplar Fruit smiled helplessly and went into the bathroom. Breakfast was also a joyous occasion. The five families sat together and ate happily. The production crew did not even turn on the cameras because, according to the script, it was not the time for filming yet. The fathers also rejoiced. This trip was really too blissful. After seeing the primitive people, the production crew had much less trouble. They no longer had to wake up in the morning to exercise and eat. After breakfast, everyone got on the bus and went to a small farm nearby that was specially used for weddings. The clean lawn, the bright green, and the neat and flat construction made it look like the home ground of Real Madrid Bernabeu. What could not be ignored was the neatly placed vertical flower racks. Bunches of white flowers decorated the top, and green vines hung down to cover the flower racks. It made people feel as if the flowers had appeared out of thin air. The 2 rows of flowers formed a wide and straight path. Anyone could tell that this path was going to be an important recording location for today's segment. Behind the path was a relatively new glass wooden house. From the outside, it looked a bit like the kind of houses that Western tycoons lived in movies. It was very modern, and the brand new feeling of the wood made people feel that they could live in it and feel the fragrance of the forest. Of course, when Poplar Fruit and the others walked in, that was not the case. It was actually empty inside. There was a large living room with a few rows of sofas. It was probably for them to sit on while they waited. The mother group brought the 3 children who came later and followed the assistant director's sister to a few large rooms at the back. Before Fong Beibei left, she mischievously whispered in Poplar Fruit's ear, "Please look forward to it." Look forward to what? Could Poplar Fruit not guess? Although Poplar Fruit and the others were not allowed to go in, there was a room in front that was filled with rows of black suits. coupled with the decoration outside. How could Poplar Fruit not guess what Fong Beibei and the others were going to do? However, even though she said that, Yangwu was really looking forward to it. What would Fong Beibei look like when she put on the wedding dress? Poplar Fruit still remembered the holiness of the old granny after she put on the wedding dress during the first trip. He also remembered the stunning appearance of the models wearing the wedding dress during the Bali Fashion Week. Of course, there was also Fong Beibei. She was so charming when she wore the bridesmaid's wedding dress at Song Jiwen's wedding. They were all different kinds of beauty, but they were not complete. Even today, Poplar Fruit felt that it was not complete enough. However, Poplar Fruit wanted to see it very much. It was like looking forward to dessert before a big meal. He looked forward to Fong Beibei wearing the wedding dress before their official wedding. The two of them would have a rehearsal. Let's go and change our clothes. Poplar Fruit smiled, patted his daughter's shoulder, and walked into the room. What clothes are you changing into? Chi-Chi looked around curiously. Poplar Fruit looked at the rows of men's suits. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He smiled and said, Kiki, can you wear a suit today? If Kiki dressed up as a man, she might be very handsome. Thinking about it, the little girl also had a pair of long legs and a beautiful face. If she changed into a well-ironed long suit pants, changed into a shirt, put on a bow, and put on a slender suit jacket, then tied her hair up, put on a small top hat, and posed in a classic Michael Jackson pose, wouldn't she look like a handsome little boy? Of course, Kiki's face was still a little soft, unlike her father's, whose facial features were like a sculpture. After all, she was a girl. After she put on men's clothes, she was not Lin Qingxia's version of Dongfang Bubi. Perhaps she was more like Zhao Ling, played by Liu Yifei, who dressed up as a man and went to the brothel. Even if she wore men's clothes, one could still tell that she was a girl at a glance. Because of her beautiful eyes, her pursed lips, or her shyness when she lowered her head, she did not need to have a graceful figure to make men's hearts sway. Okay, Kiki replied in a daze. She did not know that her father was playing with her. Of course, if the show really had such a gentleman's outfit that suited Kiki, Poplar Fruit might really make it real and let Kiki try it on. But unfortunately, this show was called Where Are You Going, Daddy? It was not called The 100 Changes Show. How could such an educational and entertaining program come up with such a nonsensical crosstalk? Don't listen to your father's lies. The assistant director's sister, who had returned, smiled and exposed Poplar Fruit's joke. She took Kiki's little hand and said, Kiki, come with me. I will take you to change your clothes. We have prepared a super beautiful princess dress for you. I like princess dresses. That's great. Kiki jumped up happily. It was a pity that Cinderella had to become a princess in the end, not a prince. Chapter 1487. The audience did not see this scene. Otherwise, they would probably be full of resentment towards the production team. Compared to Chi-Chi, who was already very familiar with wearing a princess dress, they were more interested in Chi-Chi dressing up like a little prince. Of course, if they did not see it, they would treat it as if it did not happen. First, he put on some light makeup. Then, Poplar Fruit changed into a tailor-made suit made by the production team. It was not just a suit. In addition to the leather shoes, trousers, belt, and shirt, he also tied a black bow around his neck. The most eye-catching thing was Poplar Fruit's coat. It was handmade from high-quality wool tweed fabric. The black color was very pure, and the smooth and soft texture was very elastic. There were no creases at all. The main thing was that it was a little slender at the back. The back of the coat was in the shape of a tailcoat with 2 slits. This meant that it was not an ordinary suit, but a tailcoat worn by Western men when they attended some high-end banquets. Even if it was a tailcoat, not everyone could wear it well. After all, there was a tail at the back. Those with shorter legs might have to hang down to the ground. However, Poplar Fruit was the opposite. His pair of long legs complemented the tailcoat, making him look even more tall and elegant. Therefore, when Poplar Fruit quickly changed his clothes and took the lead to walk out, he stole the souls of the female scriptwriters, female assistants, and other female staff in the production team who were between 20 and 40 years old. Too handsome. He was like a prince leading a white horse out of the dense fog of the forest. No, it was like a handsome knight leaning out of an open window of a castle and looking down with deep affection. No, it was more like a noble young master in a British manor riding a horse carriage. Everyone seemed to have their own opinion. After arguing, they realized that Poplar Fruit had become so charming just by changing into a tailcoat. It was enough to satisfy everyone's fantasies. Teacher Yang, I want to take a picture with you. A female assistant ran up with a blushing face. Although she was blushing, her actions were not shy. She directly hooked her arm around Poplar Fruit's arm and took a selfie with him. In an instant, requests to take a picture flooded in. As for the female assistant who inspired everyone, no one knew when she had joined the queue. When she came up, everyone noticed that she was holding a tall gentleman's hat and a long walking stick. This was definitely a good item from the prop department of the wooden house. Do you want to wear it? Poplar Fruit was a little surprised, but his personality was more easygoing. He smiled and satisfied the other party's request. With a tall hat on his head and a walking stick in his hand, Poplar Fruit seemed to have transformed into a noble gentleman. Of course, there were 2 mustaches missing from his mouth. It was also because of the lack of these 2 mustaches that the Poplar Fruit looked very young. Moreover, he had an otherworldly elegance, just like a frivolous young count. The female assistant was grinning from ear to ear. She passed the phone to her friend and pinched her skirt. She stood beside Poplar Fruit like an obedient maid and took a cosplay photo. Scheming bitch, who knew how many women cursed in their hearts. Although they cursed, this creative idea inspired them. Then, all kinds of fancy poses came of Poplar Fruit. In the end, it was the director who was laughing secretly and rescued Poplar Fruit. To be honest, the suit was really one of the best inventions of human artists. There was almost no man who did not look handsome after wearing a suit. A few fathers and a few little boys came out one after another, causing waves of exclamations. Needless to say, after changing into formal attire, they no longer looked as sloppy as they usually did. Even Lin Yongjian had become elegant and handsome. When Nua, Yi, and the rest came out, they caused even louder cheers than Poplar Fruit. The older sisters and aunties' eyes lit up as they watched Nua, Yi, and the rest walk out. Each of the little gentlemen wore a fitting suit. The word cute and handsome exploded in their minds. Actually, the little guys were still not used to the constraints of the suit. After wearing the suit, they could not jump around casually, nor could they fight and play as they pleased. Even when they raised their hands, they felt bound by the suit. Therefore, after they came out, they twisted and turned from time to time, as if trying to find a suitable position. Fortunately, the quality of the suit was still very good. It was not to the extent that it would tear when they bent down. Finally, Poplar Fruit waited for the little princess that he had been eagerly waiting for. Kiki was pulled out of the wooden house by the older sister assistant director. It was as if she had her own background music. She smiled sweetly, and instantly, the white flowers on both sides dimmed. The brilliance was stolen by Kiki. She was really a little princess. Her outfit was too beautiful. The fluffy lace dress had a little lotus-like collar at the neck, but it was not too high. The bright white princess dress was so elegant. Half of her sleeves were exposed, and her fair and slender arms were half exposed to the air. Fortunately, the sun was out now, and the air outside was warm and not as cold as it was at night. If the production team's custom-made dress for Kiki made the little girl look more like a princess, then the 2 streamers that were gently and loosely wrapped around Kiki's arms were the finishing touch. The woolen silk gloves covered Kiki's forearms, making her look elegant and unique. The streamers that were as white as clouds fluttered on Kiki's fair and flawless arms, as if adding a celestial aura. The little princess Kiki, who had risen from a human emperor's princess to a celestial fairy princess, made her frown and smile between the clouds feel very distant, but also very close. What princess was more beautiful than Kiki now? Even the staff members who were addicted to taking photos with her could only secretly admire her. They did not dare to rashly go up, and they did not even dare to exclaim. It was as if their heavy breathing would disturb the fairy-like little princess in front of them. "Wow, Kiki, you're so beautiful." Fortunately, there were a few little guys who did not know anything. He laughed and ran over. The onlookers looked at the daredevil with dissatisfaction, but they could not do anything about it. Later, Kong Kong and the others also came over. Xian Xian was even more stunned, and he did not respond to Zhou Shimon's call. Xian Xian, Xian Xian, Xian Xian. Finally, Xian Xian turned his head and looked at his father in confusion, as if he wanted to say, "Don't disturb me. I'm looking at the fairy sister." Zhou Shimon helplessly spread out his hands. He wanted to secretly give his son away to take off his coat and let Kiki put it on, but looking at the boy's confused look, Zhou Shimon gave up. Even Zhuge Liang could not help but do. Kiki was surrounded by her friends, and she pursed her lips and smiled shyly. It seemed that after she put on the dress, she was also bound by the princess's rules, and she became a little restrained. Actually, this little girl was imitating the real princess she had seen before, the Princess Charlotte of Morocco. She was lucky that she still remembered. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.